My brother invited us to stay at his place, and we won't have to pay rent or bills. Ashley, we're relying on you for this. I work in finance. My husband, let's call him Bob, fixes cars, and we live in the house I grew up in. But it's not like my parents live there anymore. It's actually a family business that my dad used to run. My brother was supposed to take over the company, so he studied economics in college. Also, my skilled brother went to Oxford University overseas to study business management, then came back to the US and teamed up with my dad for a while. When my parents decided to retire and move to a place like Aspen, Colorado, to enjoy nature and relaxation, my brother took over the family business. As a result, they passed the family home down to me, their daughter. So my husband and I decided to move in there. It's in a great spot, less than 5 minutes walk from the train station, and public transportation is easy to get to. Stores, hospitals, and schools are all nearby, which is handy. It's nice to know that as our kids grow up and move out, we'll still have everything we need close by. It makes me thankful that my parents left us this house. We were looking forward to growing our family and enjoying life, but we never imagined it would all be cut short by what happened. Since we moved in, my mother-in-law has been dropping by a lot. She's always curious about my parents' business and how much they're worth. It gets uncomfortable when she starts asking, "Hey, Ashley, what's the deal with your parents' money? How much will you get when they're gone?" I find it pretty tasteless, to be honest. I don't want to be rude, so I just say, I'm not sure. I haven't really thought about it. I already have the house, so maybe there won't be much else. Even though I tried to brush it off with a laugh, she keeps pushing, saying, "Come on, they're getting up there in age. You never know what might happen." She was really fixated on talking about my parents' money. It felt like she was banking on their wealth. Even though I knew what I was set to inherit, I kept quiet. I didn't want to spill the beans to my mother-in-law or my husband, who's pretty close to her. But then, out of nowhere, something unbelievable happened. One holiday morning, around 8 a.m., the doorbell rang, and when I answered it, there were movers standing there. My mother-in-law and my brother-in-law's family had moved in without warning. I was completely caught off guard when the movers showed up. My mother-in-law and brother-in-law's family just waltzed in with big smiles, announcing they were moving in. Their enthusiasm sent shivers down my spine. When I turned to my husband for an explanation, he shrugged it off, saying, "What's the big deal if Mom and the others crash here? We've got plenty of space." He acted like it was no big deal to have them move in. I was already shocked enough by the sudden living arrangement, but then my sister-in-law dropped a bombshell. "Our brother invited us, Ashley. He said we don't have to pay rent or bills, so we're relying on you." Meanwhile, my brother-in-law started claiming rooms without asking, saying, "This room looks nice. Let's have it, Bob. Move everything out into the hallway." It all made my head spin. I couldn't believe it. They were treating my house like their own, claiming rooms left and right. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law's family have been overstepping boundaries for a while now, especially my sister-in-law, who even went through my bag without asking once. If this keeps up, they'll try to take over my room too. I've had enough. This is my house, and they're acting like they own it. I've reached my limit. I want everyone out. I'm not usually one to lose my temper or yell, but seeing these people move into the house my parents left me without asking and acting like they owned it pushed me over the edge. That's why I ended up shouting at all three of them. But then something I didn't expect occurred. "How dare you speak to us like that? You're the one who needs to leave." As soon as those words were out, I felt a sharp pain in my cheek. Did I just get slapped? It took a few moments for it to sink in. I was stunned. I couldn't believe what had just happened, and all I felt was the throbbing pain in my cheek. In that instant, something inside me snapped. I couldn't bear living with people capable of such disrespect. This house belongs to me, and I won't tolerate them treating it like their own personal space. I packed my things, planning to leave and inform my family about the situation. I needed to find a place far from here, so I rented a monthly apartment even though it meant a longer commute to work. When I broke the news to my parents over the phone, I could sense their anger, especially from my dad. He's always been supportive and caring, both as a CEO and as a father. I didn't want to drag my parents, who were about to retire, into this mess, but I had no choice. My inherited home was being taken away from me, and I had to do something about it. While I was staying in the monthly apartment, I was certain that my husband and his family were making themselves at home in my house. So I decided to take action based on suggestions from my brother and father. A few days later, during my break, I checked my phone to find numerous missed calls and messages from my husband. I knew exactly why he was reaching out. I had arranged for the water and electricity to be cut off. Since our house relies solely on electricity and we haven't installed solar panels yet, it must be quite challenging without power, especially in the heat. My husband's calls were probably about dealing with the situation. Just as I was about to ignore it, he called again, perfectly timing his call with my break. "Hey, what's happening? There's no electricity and the water's not running. Did you turn off the electricity and water?" I could sense the panic in my husband's voice over the phone. Since the house is mine and I'm not living there anymore, it only makes sense to cut off the utilities, right? That's why I had it done. I can't bear the thought of paying bills for a house I'm not even living in. So of course I had them shut off. But my husband was livid, demanding that I reinstate the contracts immediately. Just because he wants it doesn't mean I'll agree. If they want utilities, they should handle it with their own finances. Yet they always say, "It's your house, so you should pay." But their actions contradict their words. Regardless, I have no plans to renew the contracts or foot the bill. If they're unhappy about it, they should leave the house. With that, I ended the call because my break was over. Later on, my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and brother-in-law each called me separately. They were all complaining about the lack of electricity and water. They griped about how hot and uncomfortable their rooms were and how inconvenient it was without running water. But those were their problems, not mine. After hearing them out, I firmly told them to sort it out themselves and ended the calls. I thought they were just being greedy and assumed they'd give up and leave soon. However, even after a week passed, they showed no signs of leaving. So I decided to take further action. I sought advice from my father's company lawyer and asked him to send a notice to my husband. The notice was about trespassing. They had unlawfully entered my property without permission, forced me out, and were now occupying it as if it were theirs. I warned them, all four of them, that I was considering legal action. Why did I receive a lawyer's letter? Did it have to come to this? My husband, clearly taken aback and unprepared for my strong response, approached me seeking a compromise. I knew they cared deeply about their reputation, and the thought of being sued would be a severe blow to them. They wanted to avoid legal trouble, but they also didn't want to give up their current lifestyle. So they were likely trying to persuade me to let them stay. I could see through my husband's intentions perfectly. Despite this, I refused to entertain their pleas. My husband finally snapped, losing his temper even though he was at work. He shouted at me, demanding that I back down and drop the lawyer, but his outburst didn't faze me. If anything, it only irritated me further. "Who do you think you are, taking over someone else's house?" I thought to myself, no matter how much you shout, I won't change my mind. If you insist on squatting there, I'll take legal action. Think carefully before you act. Despite his continued shouting over the phone, I paid him no heed and hung up. This was a waste of time, and I had already discussed divorce with my lawyer. When I arrived home, I saw missed calls from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, but I knew they'd only be discussing settling the issue. I didn't want any more distractions, so I blocked their numbers to put an end to the calls. Eventually, my husband's proud family couldn't bear the thought of legal action, so they packed up and left the house. With the lawyer's involvement, the divorce proceedings progressed smoothly. I arranged for a cleaning service to restore the house to its former glory. Finally, I could enjoy the comfort of being back in my own, freshly cleaned home. Living separately from my husband's family and then in a rented apartment was fine, but nothing beats the comfort of my own space. Although some parts of the house are showing signs of wear, I'll need to think about renovating soon. I talked to my dad, and he recommended a great contractor for the renovation. Being on my own is surprisingly freeing. I can lounge on the couch without anyone nagging me, and I can eat whatever I please without judgment. Just as I was enjoying this newfound independence, I received a call from my ex-husband for the first time in 3 months. Initially, I ignored the call because I didn't recognize the number, but when it persisted, I reluctantly picked up, thinking it might be the contractor. However, as soon as I heard his voice, my mood plummeted. It was my ex-husband, from whom I had separated 3 months ago. I had already gone through the divorce process with the help of a lawyer, and we had agreed to stay out of each other's lives. So why was he calling me now, especially after changing his number? We had made it clear through legal channels that we wouldn't have any contact. There was no reason for us to speak. I was just about to end the call when he pleaded. Please, just listen for a moment. I'm desperate. Reluctantly, I stayed on the line. It turned out his company was facing financial trouble, and he was facing a pay cut. On top of that, his mother's health was deteriorating, leaving her unable to work. My sister-in-law and her husband are struggling financially. He's unemployed, and she's juggling multiple part-time jobs just to keep up. Unfortunately, most of her earnings are going towards paying off his debts. Meanwhile, my ex-husband is facing a pay cut, making it even harder for him to make ends meet. As they poured out their troubles to me, all I could muster was a detached, "Okay, I see." After all, these are the same people who invaded my home without permission, disregarded my rights, and then tried to force me out. It's hard to summon any sympathy for them. Their problems are their own to deal with. There's nothing I can do to help. My ex-husband's desperation only escalated. Please don't turn your back on us. We're on the brink here. We won't even have a roof over our heads or food on the table tomorrow. Remember, we used to be a family. Can't you help us? His voice trembled with near tears, but I remained unmoved. When I faced difficulties, he offered no support and even joined my mother-in-law in belittling me. Just like her, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law looked down on me, mocking my appearance and traditional values. They shunned me for being too old-fashioned. Their insults cut deep, yet they showed no remorse. As for my mother-in-law, she exacerbated the situation by pressuring me to conceive, subjecting me to strange remedies, scheduling unnecessary doctor's visits, and spreading rumors of my infertility. Looking back, my marriage held no redeeming qualities. My ex-husband, who used to be so caring before our marriage, transformed into a puppet controlled by my mother-in-law after we tied the knot. On the day my mother-in-law barged into our home, I happened to be out for an appointment. She expressed disappointment to my husband, saying I wanted to see Ashley, but she wasn't here. I want us to be friends, but I'm saddened. Upon hearing his mother's distress, my ex-husband lashed out at me without considering my side of the story. She claims she wants us to get along, but all she does is criticize me. Has my son lost weight because your cooking is so terrible? She says things like this loudly, whether we're at home or out in public. With her and my sister-in-law and brother-in-law all ganging up on me, there's no chance for us to have a harmonious relationship. I can't deal with people who behave like this anymore. No matter what you say, my decision stands. I can't assist you, so I'm ending this call now, and I don't want to hear from you again. With that, I hung up and blocked the new number. Knowing my ex-husband, he might change his number to reach me again. So I planned to change mine over the weekend. But before I could, they violated the lawyer's agreement. At 11 p.m., they showed up at my door, demanding entry and assistance. Open the door. We're family. You should take care of us. Their loud banging and shouting disregarded the late hour. What's going on at this hour? Please go home. You're disturbing the neighbors. When I approached the door, they seemed ready to force their way in. So I tried speaking through the intercom, but they ignored it, continuing to bang on the door and cause a commotion. Dealing with such unruly behavior left me speechless. I sat there feeling overwhelmed, contemplating whether to call the police when suddenly sirens blared from outside. It seemed a neighbor had taken action. Hearing the police approaching, the group, startled, assumed I had made the call and attempted to flee. But they were surrounded by onlookers, leaving them with no escape route. Soon the officers arrived and escorted them to the police station. I was questioned about the incident and provided a detailed account. News of the incident spread rapidly throughout the neighborhood, including to a colleague of my ex-husband's who happened to be among the spectators. By the next day, the entire office was buzzing with the story. Already struggling due to a pay cut, my ex-husband's troubles compounded when the company learned of his involvement with the police. He lost his job and couldn't afford his rent, leading to strained relations with his sister's family, ultimately leading to their shared living arrangement falling apart. Now, Bob and his mother reside in public housing, both working multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. Even his mother has joined the workforce part-time, desperate for additional income.
Life's funny, isn't it? One minute you're on top of the world, the next, it's crumbling beneath your feet. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This story begins in the warm glow of happiness. My name's Emily, and not too long ago, my biggest problem was deciding what to cook for dinner, or what movie to watch on a lazy Sunday afternoon. James and I met in what you might call the old-fashioned way, at a mutual friend's barbecue. He was the guy flipping burgers and telling stories, making everyone laugh. I remember thinking, who is this guy? With his easy smile and a way of looking at me like I was the only one there. It didn't take long for us to become an us. "Emily, you have to try my special burger," he'd said, handing me a plate with a confidence that made me smile. "It's got a secret sauce that'll change your life." I laughed, rolling my eyes. "Change my life, huh? That's a pretty big claim for a burger." But I'll admit, it was a darn good burger. Maybe not life-changing, but it definitely made that day memorable. Not long after, James met Grandma. She was everything to me, the one who raised me when my own parents couldn't. The way he talked to her, with respect and a bit of playful banter, it won her over in a heartbeat. "I like him," she whispered to me as he went to grab us some lemonade. "He's genuine, and he's got kind eyes. You hold on to this one, Emily." And hold on, I did. We got married in a small ceremony, just family and close friends. The house I moved into was full of memories. The walls echoed with laughter from a time when my parents were still alive. James and I started filling it with new memories of our own, and it felt like life was just right. I got pregnant about a year into the marriage. When I told James, the look on his face was something I thought I'd remember forever with warmth in my heart. His joy seemed to match mine, filling up the room until it was almost bursting. "We're going to have a baby, Em," he said, lifting me up and spinning me around. "A little one of our own, can you believe it?" "I can," I whispered back, "because it's happening with you." They say bad news never has good timing. The day I lost Grandma was a cold slap of reality, a reminder that life doesn't play fair. Grandma was more than family. She was my confidant, my cheerleader, my safe place. Losing her felt like being adrift at sea without a compass. I remember sitting on the sofa, a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, numb. James came to me, his face a mask of concern. "Em, talk to me," he urged, his voice gentle. "What's there to talk about?" I muttered, staring at the tea, watching as it lost its steam, its warmth, its life, kind of like how I felt inside. "We'll get through this together. You're not alone," he said, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. But his words, meant to comfort, felt distant, like a radio playing softly in the background, familiar yet easy to tune out. Then, as if I hadn't already been robbed of enough, our baby slipped away before I ever got to hold them, to tell them how much I loved them, to promise them the world. The miscarriage was like a physical blow, one that knocked the wind out of me and left me gasping for air, for answers, for comfort that wouldn't come. James was there, yes, always there, but somehow not really. "Emily, we can try for another baby when you're ready," he said one night as we lay in the darkness, his voice void of the pain I felt. I turned to him, a part of me desperate to find the husband who had once spun me around in joy. "I don't want another baby, James. I wanted this one. Our baby." The words were a whisper, but they might as well have been screams for how they echoed in the silence. "We'll make it through this," he said. But his assurance sounded hollow, like a promise made out of obligation rather than desire. I sought refuge in solitude, in the quiet of the house filled with too many ghosts of what could have been. Days melded into nights, and I lost track of time. I lost track of myself. James tried, in his way. "Let's go out, see people. It might help," he suggested one day, his hand resting lightly on the back of the chair I was slumped in. I shook my head, my eyes fixed on a crack in the wall, a blemish I hadn't noticed before. "I can't face the world, James. Not yet. The world is where the pain is." "Emily, staying cooped up in here won't change what happened," he pressed, but I barely heard him. How could I tell him that the world outside these walls reminded me of everything I had lost? That every street corner, every shop window, every smiling face was a reminder of a happiness that felt like it had been stolen from me? The funeral was a blur. People came, they said things, they left. I nodded, I shook hands, I accepted condolences. But nothing got through. I was in a bubble, watching life happen around me, a life I no longer felt a part of. James was there, of course, but his presence felt more like a shadow than a source of warmth. "You're so strong, Emily," he told me after the service, his hand finding mine. I wanted to pull away, to scream that I wasn't strong, that I was broken. Instead, I just nodded. What was the point in correcting him? The truth seemed too heavy to share, even with him. As days turned into weeks, I felt James pulling away. Maybe he was tired of dealing with someone who seemed to have given up on life. Maybe he just didn't know how to help me. Maybe he needed an escape from the suffocating sadness that had enveloped our home. "I'm here for you, Em, but you need to start being here too," he said one evening, his patience wearing thin. "Here?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't even know where here is anymore, James." He sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I mean, you need to start living again, for your sake and mine." I looked up at him then, really looked at him, and saw the strain in his eyes. I knew he was struggling too, in his own way, but the gulf between us had grown too wide, too deep to cross with mere words. That's when the creeping thought began to take root. Maybe I was alone in this after all. James was there, but not really. Not in the way I needed him to be. As the days rolled into weeks and then months, the chasm between James and me grew wider. The man who had once seemed like my anchor was becoming more and more like a stranger, coming home late and sometimes not at all. It gnawed at me, this feeling of him slipping away. I remember one evening, the clock ticking past midnight and the other side of the bed still cold and untouched. When he finally came through the door, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Where have you been, James? Do you know what time it is?" My voice was shaky but firm. He looked tired, his eyes avoiding mine. "Work's been a nightmare. You know how it is." His voice was flat, dismissive almost. "No, I don't know," I snapped back. "Because you never talk to me about it anymore. You never talk to me about anything." He let out a long sigh and began to take off his jacket. "Em, we've been through this. Work is work. It's stressful, and I don't want to burden you with it." "But I want to share that burden, James. I thought that's what we did," I said, the last of my words trailing off into a whisper. He paused and finally sat down on the edge of the bed, looking at me. "I know, and I appreciate it, but you have enough on your plate." "Enough on my plate?" I repeated, incredulous. "You mean dealing with the loss and trying to piece myself back together? Do you think ignoring me helps with that?" "That's not what I'm doing," he protested. But even as he said it, it sounded like he didn't believe it himself. "I offered you a divorce, James," I reminded him, my voice breaking a little. "I told you that you didn't have to stay with me out of pity or obligation." He looked up sharply at that. "Is that what you think this is? Pity? Obligation?" There was a hint of the old fire in his voice, a glimmer of the man I knew. "Yes, that's what it feels like," I admitted. "You're here, but you're not with me, not really, and it hurts." He ran his hands through his hair, a sure sign he was stressed. "Em, I'm trying. I really am. But I can't just switch off from work. It's been really tough." "But it's more than work, isn't it? You're away even when you're here. You've got your phone on you all the time, always texting, always distracted." He didn't say anything to that, just stared at the floor. "Is there someone else?" The question hung in the air, heavy and frightening. "Em, don't be ridiculous," he said quickly, but his eyes told a different story. I felt a coldness spread through me. This was not the man I married, the one who would look me in the eyes and tell me the truth, no matter how hard. "I need you to be honest with me, James. Please," I implored, my hands clasping and unclasping in my lap. He was silent for a long moment, and then, "There's no one else. It's just work. You've got to believe me." I wanted to. Oh, how I wanted to believe him. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and once that happens, things can never go back to how they were. In the weeks that followed, I watched James like a detective. I noticed how his phone was always face down, how he'd step out of the room to take calls. The signs were there, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. It was a Wednesday when my world finally started to crumble. I answered a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Is this Emily Stanton?" The voice was male, gruff, and not one I knew. "Yes, who's this?" The man paused and then, "We need to talk about your husband." My heart sank. "What about him?" "I think you'd better sit down, Mrs. Stanton." The cafe was one of those nondescript places, sandwiched between a laundromat and a closed-down bookstore. It seemed like a fitting backdrop for what was to come. I sat there, stirring my coffee, each second stretching out like an eternity until the man showed up. He was a large man, with a look that didn't invite many questions. He sat across from me, his hands clasped together, a folder sitting like a barrier between us. "Mrs. Stanton, I'm sorry for the mystery, but I thought it was best we talk in person," he started, his voice serious. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside. He nodded as if he expected the question. "My name's Mike Sanders, and I believe we have a common problem. Your husband, James." I swallowed hard. "What about him?" Mike opened the folder and slid a photo across the table. It was James with a woman I'd never seen before. They were laughing, close, too close. "That's my wife," Mike said, tapping the picture. I felt a strange detachment looking at it. "What do they have to do with each other?" "They work together, and they're having an affair," he said bluntly. I looked up, meeting his gaze. "That's impossible. James would never—" He reached back into the folder and took out a handful of printed messages, placing them in front of me. "These are just from the past week." I read them, each word a tiny dagger. There were plans to meet up, pet names, and talk of the future. A future without me, without us. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice a ghost of itself. "Because I thought you should know, and because I want to end it. I thought maybe you would want that too." I stared at the evidence, my mind racing, but my heart already knew the truth. "He told me he loved me. He promised he'd never leave." "People lie, Mrs. Stanton, and they're good at it," Mike said, his voice bitter. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. He was all I had. Mike leaned forward. "You got a choice here. You can pretend this never happened, go on with your life. Or you can confront him, make him face what he's done." "And what about you?" I asked. He sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "I'm going to divorce her. She can have him if she wants. I just want out." My hands were shaking as I gathered the papers, folding them with care I didn't feel. "What are you going to do?" Mike asked. The answer surprised even me. "I'm going to fight back." Mike nodded. "Good. If you need anything, evidence, support, you let me know." "Thank you," I said. But as I stood up, I felt anything but thankful. My life as I knew it was over, and it was time for me to figure out what came next. That day, the sun hung low, a glaring eye that seemed to watch over the unfolding scene with indifference. I was waiting on the porch when James's car pulled up. His step was light, too light for a man coming home to a crumbling marriage. He caught the look on my face as he approached. "What's with the gloom?" he asked casually, as if my scowl was just another part of an ordinary day. I held up one of the photos silently. His eyes flicked to it, and his smile faltered, but only for a second. "Oh, that," he chuckled. "I see you've met my other woman." I felt a hollow laugh bubble up from my throat. "Is that all you can say?" "Oh, that?" He folded his arms and leaned against the porch railing. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? That it was a mistake? Because it wasn't. I'm not sorry, and it was no mistake." "Why, James?" I demanded, my hands clenching the photo so tightly the edges crumpled. He laughed, a cold, heartless sound. "You were convenient, you know? A nice house, a decent bit of savings, and when your grandmother passed, well, that was just icing on the cake." I recoiled as if he'd struck me. "You think my grandmother's death was a financial gain?" "Why else would I stick around?" He shrugged. "Especially after, you know." He paused, eyeing me with a cruelty I hadn't seen before. "After the kid." I shook my head in disbelief. "And you hoped what? That I'd off myself in grief?" "Would have made things simpler," he quipped. His words were like acid, burning through the last vestiges of the life I thought I knew. "You're vile," I hissed. "You always were too sensitive." too stupid to see what was right in front of you. He continued mercilessly. You thought I would end my life? I asked, the reality of his betrayal sinking in, a cold weight in my stomach. It would have been a win-win. You'd escape your pathetic little life, and I'd be free with a nice little nest egg. His grin was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen. I couldn't hold back the tears, but I was damned if I'd let him see them fall. And now? What's your grand plan now? Now? He laughed again, stepping closer. Now, I guess I'll have to settle for a divorce. You'll probably screw me over on that, won't you? Drag it out. Make me suffer. You don't deserve quick and easy, I managed to say, my voice surprisingly even. His expression soured. You're an ugly, stupid woman, you know that? I don't know what I was thinking, marrying you. I looked at him then, really looked at him, and I felt something shift inside me. The man I had loved was a ghost, a fiction. In his place stood a stranger with a heart full of venom. Get off my porch, James, I said quietly. He smirked, taking a step back. Gladly. This place was never really my style anyway. The courthouse was a place where I thought I'd celebrate our milestones. Instead, I walked up its steps to dissolve the very foundation of my marriage. Mike was right beside me, his presence a silent support. I had the papers in my hand, feeling the weight of every word that testified against James. Mike carried his own set of damning evidence, a mirror to my betrayal. Our steps echoed in the empty hallway, a march towards a verdict we both needed. Inside the courtroom, the air was stale, heavy with the burden of judgments past. James and his mistress, Mike's wife, were already there, a tableau of guilt. Mrs. Stanton? The clerk called out. I stepped forward, handing over the sheaf of papers that detailed every misstep of my husband's affair. The judge surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on me, then on Mike. You have evidence to present? I nodded, my throat tight. Yes, Your Honor. The evidence was laid bare for the court to see. Photographs that spoke 1,000 words of betrayal, texts and call logs that wove a narrative of deceit. I didn't look at James. I didn't need to see his face to remember his lies. And how do you plead? The judge asked, turning to James and his co-defendant. Their answers were a soft murmur of legalese. No contest. The judge took his time, reviewing the evidence, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice the gavel that shattered the last tie between James and me. In light of the uncontested evidence, I am granting the petition for divorce. The division of assets will proceed as outlined, and given the circumstances, Mr. Stanton, you will also pay restitution. James stood, his face ashen, but I felt nothing. No victory, no joy, just the hollow end of a chapter. Mike met my gaze, a silent question in his eyes. Had it been worth it? I could only nod. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about setting the record straight, about reclaiming my dignity from the ruins James had left behind. The courtroom's heavy door swung closed behind me with a sound that felt final. Mike and I found a quiet corner in the bustling hallway outside. So, it's done, Mike said, his voice a mix of relief and something else, maybe sadness. I nodded, the reality of the situation settling in. It's done. They didn't even put up a fight, did they? No, he sighed, looking down at the floor. They knew there was no point. I thought about James, about the love I thought we shared, and how it had all been a lie. Do you think they're sorry for what they did, or just sorry they got caught? Mike's gaze met mine, steady and sure. Does it matter? They're out of our lives now. That's what counts. I let out a long breath, one I'd been holding since the day I got that call. I guess you're right. I didn't want it to end this way. Nobody ever does, he said. But you stood up for yourself. That counts for a lot. The weight of the papers in my bag seemed lighter now. Justice, or something like it, had been served. It didn't undo the past, but it cleared the path for the future. I just want to move on, I admitted. And you will, Mike assured me. This is a fresh start for both of us. I managed a small smile. A fresh start, I echoed. We walked to the exit, the light from the doors growing brighter as we approached. Outside, The sun was shining, and the world moved on, indifferent to the small dramas unfolding in its midst. "Emily," Mike said as we stepped into the daylight, "what will you do first?" I thought for a moment. "I'm going to go home, take a long bath, and then I'm going to start planning my future, one step at a time." "That sounds perfect," he said. "And if you ever need a friend, you know where to find me." I looked at him, grateful for his unexpected friendship. "Thank you, Mike, for everything." The days following the divorce were quiet. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some of Grandma's old things, the doorbell rang. I hesitated for a moment, half expecting the past to be on my doorstep, but it was just Sarah, my neighbor. "Hey, Emily," she greeted me with a warm, if somewhat pitying smile. "I heard about everything. I'm so sorry. I brought you some casserole. I figured you might not feel like cooking." I managed a small laugh. "You figured right. Thanks, Sarah." We settled in the kitchen, the casserole warming in the oven, filling the room with a homely scent. "So, what will you do now?" Sarah asked, sipping on the tea I'd made for us. "I'm not sure," I admitted, "but I'm thinking of selling the house. There are too many memories here. I need a fresh start." "That sounds like a good idea," she said. "A new place, new memories." "Yeah," I mused, gazing out of the kitchen window. "I want to travel too, see the places Grandma and I always talked about." "That's wonderful, Emily. It's what you deserve," Sarah encouraged. I smiled, feeling a flicker of excitement at the thought. "It is, isn't it? I spent so long living for someone else, trying to be what James wanted. It's time I lived for myself." Sarah reached across the table, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. "You've got this. And who knows, maybe along the way, you'll find someone who loves you for you." "I hope so. But for now, I'm okay with being by myself," I said, feeling a strength within me that I hadn't felt in years. "You're stronger than you know, Emily. And this fresh start is just the beginning for you," Sarah said with a knowing nod. The timer on the oven dinged then, breaking our conversation. As I stood to get the casserole out, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter with James was over, but my story was far from finished. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought of Grandma, of her strength and her love. She had wanted me to be happy, to be cared for. In the end, I realized the person who needed to care for me the most was myself. And with that realization, I knew that no matter where I went or what I did, I would be okay. You could say I traded in chaos for candy when I met Ben. My days used to be filled with managing disasters and cleaning up corporate messes, but then love swept in, and before I knew it, I was knee-deep in sugar and spice, and everything nice at Sugar Haven, Ben's family candy store. It wasn't long before I took over the store's finances, and we started to see some real success. "Good morning, love." Ben greeted me one Monday as I stepped into the sweet aroma of our shop. His smile was infectious, and despite the tension that was brewing, it was a reminder of why I was here. "Morning," I replied, flipping through the mail, bills mostly, which I had learned to manage like a pro. "Sales are up this month. That new chocolate line is a hit," I said, trying to keep things positive. Ben just shrugged, a bit too casually. "Yeah, well, that's all you, isn't it? Mom still thinks I'm the candy king," he chuckled, but I could tell the words weighed on him more than he let on. Speaking of the devil, Linda waltzed in, all smiles and no sense of personal space. "Benjamin, my boy, you've outdone yourself. The store looks fabulous," she beamed, patting her son on the back. Her gaze then slid over to me, and her lips pursed just slightly. "Anna, still playing shopkeeper, I see." I let out a soft sigh. "Good morning, Linda. And yes, playing shopkeeper is keeping us in the black," I responded, keeping my tone even. It was too early for a spat, and the last thing I wanted was to give her the satisfaction of seeing me ruffled. She tisked, waving a hand in dismissal. "Numbers, numbers. You should leave that to the accountants and help my son with the real business." Her eyes glinted with that all-too-familiar mix of disdain and condescension. Before I could answer, Ben stepped in. "Mom, Anna's doing more than fine. We're doing great because she's got a head for business." He slipped an arm around my waist, a silent show of solidarity. Linda sniffed, clearly not convinced. Well, as long as my boy is happy, I suppose that's what matters. And with that, she flounced off to the other side of the store, presumably to find some other way to remind us of her presence. Ben squeezed my side apologetically. "Don't let her get to you," he murmured. I shook my head, forcing a smile. "I'm not. Let's just focus on the shop, okay?" And focus we did. With each day, Sugar Haven became more than just a candy store. It was our little piece of paradise. At least that's what I thought until everything began to crumble. I started noticing the changes when the deliveries got more frequent, and they weren't full of sugar or spice, but things that had price tags that made my stomach drop. "Another package, Ben?" I asked one evening as I locked up the register. I held up a sleek gadget still in its shiny packaging. It looked expensive. "Oh, that's the new phone I ordered," Ben said with a grin as he cut open the box like a kid on Christmas. "Top of the line." I raised an eyebrow. "Don't we have other things to invest in? The mixer in the back has been making that funny noise." Ben dismissed me with a wave of his hand, his attention fixed on peeling the protective film off his new toy. "It's fine, Anna. We've got to treat ourselves too, you know?" A part of me wanted to argue, to remind him of the thin line we were walking financially, but I bit my tongue. It wasn't just the phone either. Linda had taken to showing off new outfits every other week, parading through Sugar Haven like it was her personal runway. "Anna, look at this dress, isn't it just darling?" Linda twirled in a floral number that had to cost more than we made in a day. "It's nice," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "But aren't we supposed to be saving up to fix the sign out front?" Linda scoffed, patting her son's cheek. "Nonsense! The store is doing wonderfully. Benjamin, tell her." Ben, who had been half listening, nodded along. "Yeah, we're doing great, Anna. Don't worry so much." That was the problem, though. I did worry. I worried every time I looked at our books and saw the numbers that didn't add up. Doing great wasn't the term I would use when every profit we made was being swallowed by personal purchases. "Look, I'm just saying we should be careful." I tried again later that week as we sat down to look at our finances. "Maybe we can set a budget for personal expenses?" Ben looked at me like I'd suggested we sell the store and become circus performers. "A budget? Come on, Anna, we're not that bad, and it's not like you to be stingy." It stung, that word, stingy. I wasn't being stingy. I was being sensible. "It's not about being stingy, Ben. It's about being smart. We have to think about the future of Sugar Haven." He didn't seem to hear me, though, already scrolling through a website for another purchase. "You worry too much," he said, half distracted. "It'll all work out." Things took a turn when Linda decided to bring in some extra help. It was a Tuesday, I remember, because Tuesdays were inventory days, and I was elbow deep in organizing our latest shipment of candy jars when she walked in, arm in arm with a girl who couldn't have been older than 20. "Anna, this is Tessa," Linda announced with a flourish. "Tessa, dear, this is Anna, my son's assistant." I straightened up, wiping my hands on my apron. "Nice to meet you, Tessa, but I'm actually the co-manager here." Tessa offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've heard a lot about you. I'm really excited to be part of the team." I glanced at Linda, whose smug look was enough to tell me she hadn't consulted Ben about this new development. "What exactly will Tessa be assisting with?" I asked, trying to keep my tone friendly. "Oh, she's going to be helping out with the business side of things. You can only do so much, after all," Linda said, with a dismissive glance at my inventory list. I nodded, still a bit confused. "All right, well, we have a system here, so I'll have to bring her up to speed." It didn't take long for me to see that Tessa's version of helping out was more about hovering and less about doing actual work. And when I saw the salary Ben's mother had set for her, I nearly choked. "Ben, can we talk?" I cornered him later that day in the office. "Sure, what's up?" he asked, not looking up from his computer. "It's about Tessa. Her salary it's more than what we can afford for the role she's in." Ben finally looked up, his brow furrowing. "Mom said it was fine. She thinks Tessa's going to bring a lot to the table." I sighed, feeling like I was talking to a wall. But we agreed to discuss new hires together, especially when it comes to how much we're paying them. He shrugged, that annoyingly dismissive gesture becoming more frequent. What's done is done. Mom has a good feeling about her. I had to bite back a retort. Good feelings didn't balance books. I left the office feeling like I was the only one seeing the red flags, while Ben and his mother were content to parade around with blindfolds. I've always been the kind to check twice, maybe 3 times, especially when it comes to numbers. So when I stumbled upon an envelope stuffed in the back of a filing cabinet while hunting for a misplaced invoice, my first thought was that it was just another forgotten bill. But as I flipped through the papers, my heart started to race, not from excitement, but from cold, hard dread. It was a loan document, with Sugar Haven listed as collateral, and the amount was far more than what would ever be considered reasonable for our modest shop. "Ben," I said, walking into his cluttered office, papers in hand. "What is this?" He glanced up, and I saw his eyes flicker, the first sign of guilt I'd seen in him in months. "Oh, that. It's nothing. Just a small loan I took out to cover, store improvements." "Store improvements?" I echoed, incredulous. "This amount could renovate the store 5 times over. What did you really use it for?" There was a pause, long enough for the truth to wedge itself between us. "Okay, look," he started, and I could tell he was choosing his words carefully. "I might have used some of it for the house, the one I've been working on, for us." "For us?" I repeated, my voice sharp with disbelief. "Or for your gadgets and whatever else you've been blowing money on." He stood up then, his chair scraping back with a sound that felt like a gavel on my patience. "It's not like that, Anna. You don't understand. This is all going to pay off in the end." I shook my head. "No, Ben. Taking out a loan against the store without telling me, that's what I don't understand. How could you be so reckless?" Before he could answer, Linda bustled in, her nose wrinkling as she saw the papers in my hand. "What's all this about?" she demanded. Ben tried to explain, but I cut him off, thrusting the loan papers at her. "Did you know about this?" She barely glanced at the documents before waving them off. "Of course I did. Ben's just doing what's necessary for our future. And who are you to question him? You're just the help, after all." The words stung, but more than that, they fueled a fire in me. "Just the help?" I said, my voice low but firm. "I've been keeping this store afloat while you two have been treating it like your personal bank account." Ben's face had gone pale, and Linda looked like she was about to spit fire. "You ungrateful little—" "No," I interrupted, my calm surprising even myself. "What's ungrateful is not recognizing the hard work someone's been putting into this business. What's foolish is risking everything for a house that we don't even need." I waited for them to say something, to defend themselves, but all they did was stare at me, caught in the act. I left the room then, the documents clutched in my hand like a verdict yet to be delivered. The kitchen table was never really meant for business meetings, but that day, it was surrounded by the most solemn faces, as if we were about to discuss matters of state instead of the confectionery. Ben cleared his throat, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "We need to talk about the store's future." I sat down, folding my hands on the table. "We already did that when I found the loan documents." Linda huffed from across the table, her arms crossed. "We need to be realistic, Anna. The store isn't pulling in enough to cover the debts. We have to find money somewhere." There it was, the "we" that really meant me. I kept my voice steady. "What do you suggest?" Her eyes gleamed with a kind of cold calculation. "You have that inheritance from your parents. It could cover the debts and get the store back on its feet." I felt like I was listening to a stranger, not the woman whose son I had married. "You want me to use my parents' money? The money they left for me, for my future?" Ben finally spoke up. "It's not like you're doing anything else with it." "That money was meant for me, for my security," I said, the disbelief clear in my voice. "And what about our security?" Linda shot back. "You're part of this family now, aren't you?" I looked between them, my heart sinking. "I am, but it seems you only remember that when you need something from me." Ben shifted uncomfortably. "It's not like that, but we're drowning here, Anna." "So, you expect me to just hand over my future? Just like that?" I asked. Linda leaned forward. If you care about this family, yes. I thought of the long hours, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices I had made for the store. If I do this, if I invest my inheritance, I want a third of the store. I want to be an official co-owner. The room fell silent. Then Linda laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the walls. You? A co-owner? Don't be ridiculous. You're not business material. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Then you find another way to cover your debts, because my inheritance is not your emergency fund. Ben's face was unreadable, but Linda's was red with anger. You'd let this family business go under? I've tried to save it, I said, my voice quiet but firm. But I won't set myself on fire to keep you warm. I wasn't one for late-night visits to the shop, but something in my gut told me to go to Sugar Haven that evening. The place was dark, which was expected, but the faint glow of a light from the back office wasn't. I pushed the door open, the familiar tinkle of the bell sounding almost ominous in the silence. The sweet scent of confectionery that usually comforted me now felt heavy, loaded with the scent of betrayal as I walked towards the back. The murmurs from the office grew clearer as I approached, and then I saw them through the partly open door. Ben, with his arms around the new assistant, Tessa, who giggled at something he whispered in her ear. I pushed the door open fully, and they sprang apart, their expressions turning from shock to guilt within seconds. "Anna," Ben stammered, straightening his shirt. "What are you—" "It's not what it looks like." I crossed my arms, feeling a cold calm settle over me. "Really? Because it looks like I just caught my husband with his arms around another woman." Tessa was smoothing her hair back, looking anywhere but at me. "We were just going over inventory." "At midnight? With the inventory in your arms?" I said, my tone dry. Ben's eyes were pleading now. "Anna, please, you're blowing this out of proportion." I laughed, short and humorless. "Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty clear to me." He took a step towards me, and I held up a hand. "Save it, Ben. I don't know what's worse, the cheating or the pathetic lies." Tessa finally spoke up, her voice small. "I'm sorry, Anna. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." I looked at her, really looked at her, young, naive, and caught in the web of a man who couldn't take responsibility for his actions. "You should be, and you should also be looking for another job." Ben's protest was immediate. "You can't fire her for this." I turned to him, my resolve steeling. "I can and I will, and I'll be looking for a good lawyer in the morning." His face paled. "Anna, please, let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," I said, cutting him off. "You've made your choices. Now you get to live with them." I didn't wait for his response. I walked out of there with my head held high, the sound of Ben calling after me fading into the background. The morning after, I caught Ben was bright, a stark contrast to the mood in our home. I'd spent the night at my own place, the one I kept as a rental property. As I sat at the kitchen table, my phone buzzed with a message from Ben. I considered not even reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was a photo of a bank letter addressed to Ben, the words, "Final notice," and "immediate repayment required," standing out. Beneath it, he'd typed a message. "We need to talk. This is serious." I typed back a simple, "On my way," and got ready to face the music. When I arrived at the confectionery, Ben and Linda were already there, pacing like caged animals. Linda spotted me first, and her expression soured. "Decided to show up, did you?" she snapped as I walked in. I nodded, holding her gaze. "You wanted to talk?" Ben held out the letter to me. "The bank's coming down hard. We could lose everything." I scanned the letter, the numbers not surprising me, but still making my stomach turn. "So, what's your plan?" Linda's plan was apparently to glare daggers at me. "We wouldn't be in this mess if you just helped us when we asked." Ignoring her, I addressed Ben. "What are you going to do?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking defeated. I thought you could pay it off, with your inheritance." My laugh was bitter. "And I told you, I'm not doing that without a stake in the business." Linda stepped forward. "You're being unreasonable, Anna. This is a family business." I met her challenge with a calm I didn't feel. And where was this family when your son was spending money we don't have and hiring his friends for fun? Ben started to say something, but stopped, his eyes dropping to the floor. You don't get to play the family card only when it suits you, I continued. We'll figure something else out then, Ben muttered. You'll have to, I agreed. Then Linda did something unexpected. She smiled, but it wasn't pleasant. Fine, but if you're not going to help, then you're out. We'll manage without you. You're fired. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch out before I matched her smile with my own. Okay. Their surprise was almost comical. Just like that? Ben asked, his voice incredulous. Just like that, I confirmed. But I want you to know, I took photos of you and Tessa. I have records of all the money you've wasted. If you think you can fire me and sweep all this under the rug, you're wrong. Linda's smile vanished. You wouldn't dare. Oh, but I would. And when I leave, I'm taking all my hard work with me. You can explain to the bank why the business is about to tank without the person who is actually running it. Months had passed since I last set foot in Sugar Haven, and life had taken on a new kind of normal. The crisp sound of papers, the hum of focused conversations, and the sight of a crisis managed and resolved. These had replaced the scent of sugar and spice. I sat in my new office, a stark contrast to the confectionary's back room, when my phone rang. Glancing at the caller ID, I saw it was Claire, a former employee at the shop and the only one I still talked to. Hey Claire, what's up? I greeted, with a hint of caution. News about Sugar Haven always carried a tinge of the past. You haven't heard then? Claire's voice was a mix of pity and discomfort. The shop. They closed down last week. The bank foreclosed on them, and the house too. I leaned back in my chair, a weight lifting off my shoulders that I hadn't realized was there. I see. And Ben and his mother? There was a pause. They're not doing great. Rumor has it they've moved in with his aunt. No one's seen them much. I sighed, not quite sure how to feel. Thanks for letting me know, Claire. She hesitated before adding, Anna, everyone knows you were the heart of that place. It was never the same after you left. A small, sad smile touched my lips. I appreciate you saying that. How about you? Found a new job yet? Yeah, I'm working at a bakery downtown. It's not Sugar Haven, but it's a start. That's great to hear. You always had a talent for baking. I'm sure you'll do well there. We chatted for a few more minutes before saying goodbye. I hung up and looked out the window at the bustling street below. There was a knock at my door, and my assistant peeked in. Your 3 o'clock is here, Anna. Thanks, send them in, I responded, shaking off the remnants of nostalgia. The clients came in, a husband and wife team looking worried about their own business. I stood to greet them, ready to dive into another challenge. We've heard great things about you, Anna, the wife said as we sat down. They say you're the best crisis manager in town. I smiled, the title sitting comfortably with me. I'll do my best to live up to that reputation. Now, tell me about your business, and let's see how we can turn things around. As they spoke, I listened, already forming strategies in my mind. This was my world now, where every problem had a solution and every crisis was an opportunity. Sugar Haven and its bitter memories were behind me, and ahead was a path that I had forged for myself, a path of resilience, redemption, and rebirth. The meeting stretched on, the client's initial anxiety giving way to hopeful smiles as we discussed possibilities. They left with a renewed sense of purpose, and I turned back to my desk, my heart lighter than it had been in a long time. In the end, I realized that sometimes the sweetest outcomes come after the most bitter trials, and the future was mine to create, one careful step at a time. My name is Elaine, and at 55, I find myself in the sterile quietude of a hospital room, the IV drip a constant reminder of the battle I'm facing, cancer. The cold touch of the sheets is a stark contrast to the warmth I used to feel at home, now a distant memory. 15 years have lapsed since I walked down the aisle to George, a widower with a bright-eyed daughter, Mia. She was 10, all pigtails and toothy smiles, eagerly accepting me not just as her father's wife, but as a mother in spirit. She became the daughter I never had, the unexpected joy in a marriage I thought would fill the pages of my life with love and companionship. George was a man of stature, a businessman whose allure was as much about his charisma as it was the way he seemed ready to build a new life with me. But time has a way of eroding facades, and his once tender patience gave way to relentless demands. I'd trudge home from my job as a financial analyst, a role that demanded precision and left little room for error, only to find a second shift awaiting me. A test of my domestic diligence I was bound to fail in his eyes. I remember his exacting standards, the way he'd scrutinize the dinner table. "Elaine, is this the best you could do?" he'd ask, barely looking at the carefully prepared dishes before him. His words were like weights, each one piling on until I felt I could barely stand. Yet I continued to cook, clean, and care for him, even when my body screamed for rest. My parents, God bless them, would often tell me, "Elaine, you need to take care of yourself too." But their advice would fall on deaf ears. I was too caught up in the cycle of appeasement. It's during one of these silent meals that my cell phone vibrates, startling me from my thoughts. It's Mia. Her voice is a balm to my tired spirit. "Mom, how are you holding up?" I try to sound stronger than I feel. "I'm hanging in there, sweetie. How are you?" She's silent for a beat too long, and I know she's carrying a weight too heavy for her young shoulders. "I'm worried about you, Mom. Dad, he doesn't seem to care." Her words are a punch to the gut, but not unexpected. George's absence in these sterile white walls has been as loud as the blips on the monitors beside me. "Mia, love, I know. It's okay. We have each other," I say, the words tasting like a mix of sadness and resolve. There's a pause, and then her voice, laced with a quiet strength, comes through. "We do, and I'm here, every step of the way. Don't worry about Dad. Worry about getting better." Her reassurance is the anchor I didn't know I needed. When she visits, we don't talk about George, or the cold dinners, or the way his eyes no longer held any warmth for me. Instead, we talk about her job, the books she's reading, the life she's building. Her resilience and independence make me proud, and I cling to the fact that I played some part in shaping the incredible woman she's become. I lie back, closing my eyes as Mia's promises echo in my mind. The hospital room feels less confining somehow, as if her words have breathed life into its corners. I am not alone, and that's a thought worth holding on to. The day starts before the sun peeks over the horizon, my alarm clock a relentless foe. I'm up, pulling on the clothes I laid out the night before, my movements as automatic as the coffee maker that sputters to life in the kitchen. George is still asleep, the rise and fall of his chest the only evidence of life. At work, the numbers and spreadsheets are a welcome distraction. They don't complain, they don't demand, they just exist in their black and white cells, waiting for me to make sense of them. My colleagues are another story, buzzing around with office gossip and weekend plans. "Elaine, you've got to come out with us one of these Fridays," Janet from accounting says, popping her head into my cubicle. I manage a smile, though I can't remember the last time I had plans that didn't involve George or a grocery list. "Thanks, Janet. Maybe next time." She gives me a sympathetic pat on the shoulder before buzzing off to her next conversation. Home again, the routine continues. I'm chopping vegetables for the stew George likes when he walks in, early from work. His mood's a toss-up. I brace myself for whatever version of him is coming through the door. "Smells good," he says, which feels like a small victory. I let out the breath I've been holding. "It should be ready in about an hour," I respond, keeping my tone even. He grunts, disappearing into the living room. The TV comes to life, and I'm left alone in the kitchen with the carrots and potatoes. I find comfort in the rhythm of my knife against the cutting board, a simple, predictable sound. Later, we sit across from each other at the dining table, a chasm of unsaid words between us. He's scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging the meal. "It's good," he mumbles after a few minutes, but there's a distance in his voice that's become all too familiar. I nod, my own phone lighting up with a text from Mia. "Thinking of you, Mom. Hope dinner went well." I type back a quick, "Love you," and slip the phone back into my pocket. George looks up, eyes narrowing. Was that Mia? Yeah, just checking in, I say, trying to keep the conversation light. He nods, going back to his phone, and we finish dinner in silence. I clean up, the clinking of dishes filling the empty air. Tomorrow will be the same, the grind wearing away like waves on a cliffside, constant and relentless. But tonight, Mia's message is a lifeline, a reminder that not everything is as cold and unforgiving as this routine. There's warmth there, love, and it's enough to keep me going for one more day. The hospital room's constant beeps and murmurs are background noise as I'm lost in thought. It's during one of these quiet moments that Mia walks in, her face etched with worry. I can tell she's bearing a weight, the kind that's ready to topple over. She pulls a chair close to my bed, takes my hand, and sighs deeply. Mom, there's something you should know, she begins, her voice a mix of anger and sorrow. I squeeze her hand, encouraging her to continue. What is it, Mia? It's about Dad, she pauses, gathering her thoughts. He has someone else. The words hang heavily between us. I had felt the presence of someone in our lives, an invisible intruder, but hearing it confirmed sends a chill through me. He introduced her to me, Mom, Mia's voice cracks, as his future wife. The air feels thick, like I'm breathing through cotton. I try to absorb the shock, to maintain some sense of composure for Mia's sake, but inside, I'm reeling. When? The word comes out as a whisper. Last week. He told me he was serious about her, Mia replies, her eyes not leaving mine, a silent apology in her gaze. There's a long pause as I process this betrayal. Thank you for telling me, sweetheart, I manage to say at last. How long have you known? Just a few days, she admits. I didn't want to upset you, but I thought it's better you hear it from me. The dull hum of the hospital seems to fade into silence. I'm grateful for her honesty, yet the pain is sharp, unyielding. I nod, feeling an odd sense of calm amidst the turmoil. We'll deal with this, I say, more to convince myself than to reassure her. Mia leans forward, resting her forehead against our clasped hands. I'm here for you, Mom, whatever you need. I draw a deep breath, my mind already turning. My husband's betrayal is a deep cut, but I won't let it be the end of my story. There's a plan forming, a way out of the mess he's made. And in this sterile hospital room, with my stepdaughter by my side, I feel the first stirrings of a future where I am no longer in the shadows of a loveless marriage. I will rise from this, with a cunning that's been honed by years of quiet observation. George may have underestimated me, but he'll soon learn that's his mistake. I look at Mia, her strength becoming my own. Let's start planning, I say, and there's a new determination in my voice. Our bond, unbroken by the lies that surround us, is the foundation we'll build upon. And as Mia smiles, a small, fierce smile, I know we'll win this battle together. The next day, Mia arrives with her laptop tucked under her arm and a look in her eyes that says she means business. She pulls up a chair next to my hospital bed, opens her laptop, and looks straight at me. Okay, Mom, let's talk strategy, she says with a determined nod. I can't help but smile at her spirit. I've been thinking about that, I admit. I want to be fair, but also, I want to protect myself and my future, and yours. Mia nods, her fingers poised over the keyboard. First things first, we should get a lawyer, someone who can help us navigate the divorce smoothly. I agree. Yes, a lawyer, and we'll need to gather all the financial documents. I've got most of them at home in the safe. We can go through them together, Mia offers. What about the house and the rest of the assets? I've been doing some math, I start, feeling the edge of the bed with my fingers. The house. I think I'll let him have it. Mia frowns, surprised. Really? Are you sure? I nod firmly. I want a fresh start, somewhere new, without the memories. Plus, I've got something he doesn't know about. Her eyebrows raise in curiosity. What's that? The investment account, I say. The one my father helped me set up. It's in his name, technically, but it's mine. There's quite a bit of money there, enough for a new place and a comfortable life. Mia's eyes widen. He doesn't know about that? No, And he won't, I state. That money was from before we married. It's separate, and I want to keep it that way. Mia types away, probably making notes. Got it. We keep that account quiet. We should also think about alimony or any spousal support. I shake my head. I don't want his money, but I won't say no if it's offered. It could be useful. Okay, Mia says. And after the legal stuff is sorted? That's when I start my new life, I say, looking out the window. I want to travel, see places I've always dreamed of. When I'm well, of course. Mia reaches out and squeezes my hand. You'll get well, Mom, and I'll be right there with you wherever you go. I squeeze back, feeling a surge of gratitude for this girl. No, this woman, who's been my rock. We're in this together, I tell her, and it's more than just about the plan. It's about us, our journey ahead, and the unspoken understanding that we're a team now. The afternoon sun casts long shadows across my bed as we continue to plot, not just for the end of my marriage, but for the beginning of something new. Just the two of us, ready to face whatever comes next. A few days had passed since Mia and I had put together a plan. Lying on my hospital bed, I felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety about setting our plan into motion. Mia walked into the room, her face flushed from the cold outside. All right, it's time, she said, sitting down beside me. Are you sure you're up for this, Mom? I nodded, the IV in my arm a stark reminder of my current weakness, but my resolve was strong. I'm sure, it's now or never. Mia took out her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. I'm about to text Dad. I'll tell him that you want to discuss the divorce and that you're willing to talk settlement. That'll get his attention, I murmured, the bitterness in my voice belying my calm exterior. Mia sent the text, and we waited. It didn't take long for her phone to buzz. She read the message and looked up at me. He's biting. Wants to come over tomorrow to talk terms. I couldn't help the wry chuckle that escaped my lips. Talk terms, huh? All right. When he comes, let him believe he's in control. That's the bait. Mia frowned slightly, her concern for me clear. And you're okay with this? With him coming here and acting like he's won? I reached for her hand, my grip firmer than it had been in days. It's just an act, Mia. Remember that. We're letting him think he's won because it's the only way to get what we need from him. Mia squeezed my hand back, her own determination returning to her eyes. Okay, Mom, I trust you. And, I added, make sure he sees the safe when he comes. It's empty, but he doesn't know that. If he thinks there's something valuable in there, it'll keep him focused on the wrong thing. She nodded, making a mental note. Got it. And after he leaves? We proceed with the divorce as planned. But remember, whatever happens, don't let on about the money. That's our ace. Mia stood up, her phone in her pocket. I won't. We'll get through this, just like you said, together. As she walked out, I lay back against my pillow, closing my eyes. This was just the beginning, but I had to believe that it would lead to an end. Our end, one where Mia and I could move forward, free from the shadows of deceit that had loomed over us for far too long. The morning light crept through the blinds, casting lines across the hospital room floor. I had barely slept, thoughts whirling about the upcoming confrontation. I tried to steady my breathing, the rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside my bed, a constant reminder of my situation. There was a knock on the door, and Mia peeked in, her face serious. He's here, Mom. I nodded, sitting up a little straighter. Let him in. Mia opened the door, and in walked George, my soon-to-be ex-husband. He had a smirk on his face that made my stomach turn, but I kept my expression neutral. Hello, George, I said, my voice steady. Didn't expect to see you looking so alive, he sneered, taking a seat without being offered one. So, what's this about a settlement? I took a deep breath. I want to keep things simple. No dragging this out. You can have the house. His smirk widened. That's generous of you. What's the catch? No catch, I replied, meeting his gaze. I just want to end this cleanly. I'm tired, George. I don't have the energy for a fight. Mia watched, her face a mask of control. George's eyes flicked to her and then to the safe in the corner of the room. I suppose you'll be wanting support then? He asked, a greedy glint in his eyes. I shook my head slightly. No, I don't want your money. I'll manage on my own. He leaned back, looking suspicious. What's your game here? You're giving up everything. What are you hiding? Nothing to hide, I said, allowing a hint of fatigue to seep into my voice. I just want peace, George, and I think you do too. He snorted. Yeah, peace, with a young, beautiful woman waiting for me. Mia's hand clenched into a fist, but she didn't speak. I hope she makes you happy, I said quietly. George stood up, looking around the room once more. Fine, I'll have my lawyer call yours. We'll get this over with. As he reached the door, he paused and looked back at me. You're a fool, you know that? Letting go of everything without a fight. I met his gaze, my own eyes clear. Maybe, but sometimes, letting go is the only way to move forward. George shook his head and left, the door closing with a soft click behind him. Mia rushed to my side. Are you okay, Mom? I nodded, feeling a weight lifting off my shoulders. I'm fine, it's done. Now we just have to follow through. Mia hugged me, her presence a comfort. You're the bravest person I know. I hugged her back, allowing myself this moment of warmth. Brave? Maybe. But I'm not in this alone, am I? No, Mom, Mia whispered. Not alone, never alone. The ink on the divorce papers wasn't even dry when Mia dropped the bomb about the money. She was hesitant at first, biting her lip in that way she does when she's nervous. But I urged her on, knowing that whatever came next was just another scene in this absurd play my life had become. Dad knows about the $3 million, Mom, Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. I sighed, not surprised. I expected as much. What's his play? It didn't take long for him to make his move. The next day, he was at my hospital room door, his eyes wide with a mix of greed and desperation. He knelt by my bed, taking my hand in his. I've been a fool, he started, his voice trembling with feigned emotion. Please, let's put all this behind us and start over. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I felt nothing. It was liberating. I couldn't help but laugh, a genuine, deep laugh that I hadn't felt in years. Start over? I said, pulling my hand away. There's nothing to start, George. It's done. His face turned an ugly shade of red, the mask slipping. You think you can mock me? He hissed. I'll take you to court. I'll take every penny of that money. That money, I said calmly, almost enjoying this, is safely out of your reach. It's in my father's name. There's not a thing you can do about it. His eyes bulged and he spluttered, his anger a living thing between us. But before he could form words, security was at the door, alerted by the commotion. They didn't even need to speak. Their presence was enough. George's outburst was his final act, his curtain call. As they escorted him out, his shouts echoed down the hall, a pitiful sound that faded with each step. I leaned back against my pillows, a sense of peace settling over me. Mia, who had stood by the door, her face a mix of worry and anger, finally let out a long breath. Are you okay, Mom? I reached for her hand, a smile playing on my lips. I am now, sweetheart. It's truly over. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the past lifting, leaving room for something new, something better. And as the door closed on the last vestige of my old life, I felt ready to face a new day. It was a clean slate, a true new beginning, and I was ready to write my own story. Life after cancer, and George felt like stepping out of a long, dark tunnel into sunlight. I bought a house with a big garden, somewhere Mia could visit whenever she wanted, a place that felt like ours, truly ours. One afternoon, Mia and I were sitting on the porch, sipping lemonade and watching the sun dip below the trees. She had been helping me unpack boxes, turning the house into a home. Her laughter was a frequent sound here, echoing off the walls, filling spaces that had known too much silence. You know, Mom, Mia said, her eyes scanning the yard, I've never seen you this relaxed. I smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. I have a lot to be thankful for, I beat cancer, I'm free of George, and I have you. She squeezed my hand. I'm just glad you're finally putting yourself first. You always took care of me, even when I wasn't your responsibility. I shook my head. You were always my responsibility, Mia. The moment I decided to be your mom, that was it. You were my family. Mia's eyes misted over, and she gave me a teary smile. I'm glad he's out of our lives. I've never liked how he treated you, and now we don't have to deal with his drama anymore. The sun had almost set, and the sky was a canvas of purples and oranges. I stood up, feeling more alive than I had in years. Let's go inside. I'll make us dinner, our favorite spaghetti and meatballs. She hopped up, following me into the kitchen. Can I help? She asked, rolling up her sleeves. Of course. You can start by rolling the meatballs. We moved around the kitchen together, a dance we had perfected over years of cooking side by side. As I watched her hands, so much like mine, shaping the meatballs, a sense of contentment washed over me. This is what real family feels like, I thought. There were no harsh words here, no expectations or disappointments. Just me and Mia, and a future we could shape into whatever we wanted. Our laughter and the aromatic sense of our shared cooking efforts filled the kitchen, and I knew, deep down, that this was what happiness felt like. After years of just going through the motions, I was finally living, and I had the real family, my daughter, to thank for it. I'm Jane. I had just turned 28 when I thought I met the love of my life, Mike, and everything happened so fast. We were married within a year of meeting. Mike is an accountant, tall, with a laugh that could light up any room. I work in digital marketing, love to paint on weekends, and I have always been more of a planner. We balanced each other out, or so I thought. It was the day after our wedding, and our living room was piled high with wrapped presents and envelopes. There was a chaotic beauty to it all, the remnants of our celebration. That's when Mike's parents, Carol and Dave, dropped by. I hadn't really gotten to know them since we got married so quickly, but they seemed all right, normal even. As we started opening gifts, I noticed Carol and Dave were more than just a little interested in the contents. Is that a crystal vase? Carol asked, picking up a shimmering piece that my aunt had given us. She turned it over in her hands, eyes gleaming. Yeah, it's from my Aunt Linda. Pretty, isn't it? I said, trying to nudge her attention away from claiming it. Before I knew it, Carol had placed it in a separate pile to the side. I think we can find a good place for this at our house, she said nonchalantly. Mike didn't seem to notice, busy untangling a set of fancy kitchen gadgets from his cousin. I shot him a look, hoping he'd say something. Mom, that's our wedding gift, Mike finally said with an easy smile, as if it was all a big joke. Oh, come on, it'll just collect dust here. We'll use it, Dave chimed in, wrapping an arm around Carol. Besides, you two are young. You'll get plenty more gifts over the years. I tried to laugh it off with them, but it felt off. Actually, I was thinking it would look great in our foyer, I said, attempting to claim it back without causing a scene. Carol looked at me, her expression a mix of surprise and annoyance. Jane, you need to learn to share. We're family now, and families help each other out, she said, her tone firm, as if she was teaching me some sort of lesson. Mike, catching the tension, quickly jumped in. Let's not worry about this now. We've got plenty of gifts, right, Jane? I nodded, biting back my words. But as they continued to sift through the gifts, setting aside a few choice items for themselves, that uncomfortable feeling settled deep in my stomach. It was like watching strangers claim parts of my life as their own. And Mike, well, he just let them. Our first year of marriage flew by, and before I knew it, our anniversary had arrived. I wanted to make it special, a celebration of us. So I booked a table at Chez Louis, a cozy little spot we both loved. I thought it would be romantic to have Mike's parents join us, to show them they're important to us. As we sat down at the restaurant, Carol and Dave were already there, menus in hand. This place is fancy, Carol said, eyeing the chandeliers. Mike squeezed my hand under the table, a silent thank you for organizing it all. The waiter came by and we started to order. I went for the salmon, Mike's favorite. and I noticed Carol's eyes darting down the menu to the most expensive items. "We'll have the lobster and the filet mignon," she declared, pointing at the priciest things without a second glance. Dave nodded in agreement. "And why not throw in a bottle of your best wine?" he added, winking at the waiter. I could feel my smile stiffening. "Quite the celebration, huh?" I tried to keep my voice light. Mike shrugged. "It's a special night," he said. "Let's not think about the cost tonight." The conversation was light for the most part, but I couldn't help but notice how Carol and Dave savored the food like it was their last meal, almost oblivious to the price tag I knew would come at the end. As we ate, I couldn't shake the feeling of being taken advantage of. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was the principle. It was our anniversary, and it felt like it was being hijacked. When the check arrived, I saw Mike's eyes widen a little, but he quickly recovered and handed his card to the waiter. On our way out, Carol looped her arm through mine. "You know, Jane, this was just lovely. We should do it again next year," she said, a satisfied smile on her face. Thanksgiving was around the corner, and with it came the start of the holiday season. Mike and I had started to decorate the house, a mix of fall colors and early Christmas cheer. It was cozy, the kind of place you'd want to come back to after a long day. One evening, as we were stringing up some lights around the living room windows, Mike's phone pinged with a message. He read it and laughed. "Oh, my parents are ahead of the game. They've already sent their Christmas wish list." I was untangling another set of lights and looked up. "Wish list?" "Yeah, they send one every year. Helps with shopping," he explained, his fingers scrolling through his phone. Curiosity got the better of me. "So, what's on this famous list?" Mike hesitated, then handed me his phone. The list was extensive. Top-tier electronics, designer clothes, luxury items that they probably didn't even need. I scrolled through in disbelief. "They can't be serious," I said. "This is a lot." Mike took his phone back and shrugged. "They like the good stuff. What can I say?" I didn't know how to respond. There was a knot forming in the pit of my stomach. Mike's birthday was also coming up, and I'd been so excited to give him the watch he'd been eyeing for months. Now it felt like any gift would be less about us and more about fulfilling a list. When it came to us making our list, I couldn't help but feel petty making one at all. "Maybe we should just ask for charitable donations in our name," I suggested half-heartedly. Mike laughed. "Good one, but seriously, what do you want? You need a new laptop, right?" The holidays rolled around, and I got Carol and Dave a nice coffee maker. Nothing too fancy but practical. They, in turn, gave me a set of scented candles. They were nice, but the difference was stark. I didn't say anything. Mike seemed happy with the fancy drone they got him, though. The unspoken rule was clear. We were expected to give big and receive small. It didn't feel right, but bringing it up only seemed to cause tension. So, I kept quiet, wrapping gifts and pasting on a smile for the holidays. But inside, I was beginning to count the costs, not just in dollars, but in the emotional toll this was starting to take. I was at my desk, staring at the computer screen when the email notification popped up. It was my quarterly bonus, bigger than I had expected. My first thought was to do something meaningful with it, something for Mike and me. So, I booked us a trip to Paris. We had talked about going since we met, and it felt like the perfect time to make that dream happen. That night over dinner, I told Mike about the surprise. His face lit up like I'd never seen before. "Paris? Really? Babe, that's amazing!" he exclaimed, getting up to kiss me. I was basking in the joy of the moment when his phone rang. It was his mom. I could tell by the way his face changed. "Yeah, she booked us a trip to Paris," he said into the phone, and I knew I should have asked him not to say anything just yet. Mike's enthusiasm dwindled as he listened more and more. I know you've always wanted to go." He trailed off, looking at me with a pained expression. I felt my heart sink. He hung up and there was a heavy silence. "They want to come with us," he said finally, almost like he was asking for permission. I sat there, my fork halfway to my mouth, paused in midair. "To Paris? With us?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah. They said they've never been and always wanted to go. Mike explained, running a hand through his hair. I think we should take them. The room felt suddenly too small. It's supposed to be for us, Mike. Our trip, I said, feeling a tightness in my chest. He didn't respond at first, then, I know, but they're getting older, and I feel bad. They've done so much for me. I thought about all the one-sided gift exchanges, the anniversary dinner, and every other little thing that had piled up over the past year. But this is our time, I insisted, my voice firm. We can plan a trip with them another time. This bonus, it's for us. Mike sighed, a deep, frustrated sound. They won't understand that. You know how they are. And you know how hard I've worked for this, I said, the words like stones in my mouth. I want us to enjoy it together, just us, like we planned. Mike didn't say anything for a while. Then, okay, we'll tell them some other time might work better. But when the time came to tell them, Mike's words faltered. Look, maybe we can all go together next year, he offered, but Carol was having none of it. Why next year? We can afford it now, she retorted over the speakerphone, her voice laced with disappointment. I couldn't take it anymore. Because this trip is for us, Carol, Mike and I. We need this time together, I said, unable to hide my frustration. There was a pause, then Carol said, Well, that's very selfish of you, Jane. Very selfish indeed. After the call, the air between Mike and me was tense. He was torn, I could tell, but this was one thing I wasn't willing to budge on. Paris was meant to be a dream trip for us, and I wasn't going to let that dream be taken away. Mike became a shadow in his own home, leaving early for work and coming back late. Our conversations dwindled to monosyllables. Dinner's in the oven, I'd say when I heard the garage door open, my voice echoing off the empty walls. Thanks, he'd reply, a hollow word that hung in the air between us. I missed him, missed us. I yearned for the easy days when we'd dream together on the couch, our plans and laughter intertwined. I longed to reach out to him, to break through the invisible barrier that had erected itself after the argument over Paris. But every attempt felt like speaking through a thick glass wall. I could see him, but I couldn't reach him. One particularly hard evening, I sat at the dinner table across from Mike, the sound of his fork against the plate drilling into the silence. I cleared my throat. Mike, this can't go on, I started, my voice barely above a whisper, fearful of shattering the fragile peace. We need to talk about what happened. We can't let this silence be the new normal for us. Mike continued to eat, his expression unreadable. Then he set down his fork, a sign that I had his attention, even if just for a moment. What do you want me to say, Jane? He asked, a hint of weariness seeping through. I want to understand why you're taking this so hard, why it feels like you're choosing them over me, I replied, the hurt evident in my tone. He sighed, his hands folded in front of him. They're my parents, Jane. They've been hoping to go to Paris their whole lives. And what about what we've been hoping for? Our plans? Our dreams? My own frustration started to bubble up, words becoming more pointed, desperate to bridge the gap between us. Mike ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of exasperation I'd come to recognize. I know, he said, and for a moment, I saw the flicker of the man I married, conflicted and torn, but not indifferent. It's just, they've always been there for me. I feel obligated, you know? But where does that leave us, Mike? I pressed, leaning forward, trying to catch his eye. What about our marriage? He didn't respond right away, and in that pause, I felt a wave of fear. Fear that maybe we weren't as solid as I had believed, that maybe the foundation we had built was less rock and more sand, easily eroded by the steady tide of his parents' needs and wants. It's supposed to be us against the world, Mike, not me against you and them, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside me. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I could see the conflict warring within him. I know, Jane. I just don't know how to make everyone happy. That's just it, I said, a sudden clarity washing over me. We can't always make everyone happy. But we made vows to each other, Mike. Doesn't that count for something? He nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on the table before finding mine. It does. It counts for a lot. The rest of the meal passed in a contemplative silence, a change from the strained quiet that had become our norm. It was as if my words had planted a seed, or perhaps watered one that had been lying dormant within Mike all this time. The morning sun poured in through the windows, but the warmth it usually brought seemed to have no place in our home today. I woke up to an eerie quiet, the other side of the bed untouched from the night before. The emptiness of the house felt like a heavy blanket, suffocating in its silence. Rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I reached for my phone, expecting the usual absence of messages, given the silent treatment that had taken residence in our home. Instead, my screen was flooded with notifications, all from my bank. A lump formed in my throat as I read the details. Multiple transactions, including airline tickets and a pair of hotel bookings in Paris, all made while I was asleep. The timestamps on the emails told me the flight would have left hours ago. Mike and his parents were already on their way to Paris, using my hard-earned bonus to fund a trip I was meant to be on. Disbelief turned to anger, and then to a crushing sense of betrayal. I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand as the reality settled in. Mike had access to my account. I'd trusted him implicitly, never imagining he would abuse that trust. Yet, here it was in stark black and white, a digital paper trail of deceit. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The one person I had believed would stand by me had chosen his own comfort over our relationship. I thought back to all the times I'd brushed aside the little signs, the excuses I'd made for him, for us. With trembling fingers, I dialed his number, knowing full well he wouldn't answer. Not with the time difference, not with my previous ultimatum ringing in his ears. "Mike," I began, the beep of the voicemail almost mocking in its cheerfulness. "I saw the charges. You took your parents to Paris with my bonus. I don't even know what to say, but I hope it's worth it. I hope it's worth everything." The house felt even emptier after the call, the walls closing in on me with the weight of everything unsaid, and now, perhaps, never to be spoken. I sat at the kitchen table, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos raging within me. They had left, just like that, with no regard for me or the life we were supposed to be building together. I canceled the hotel rooms, the return flights, every piece of the trip that was connected to my finances. With each cancellation, I felt a piece of my old life fall away, the future I'd envisioned evaporating before my eyes. By the time I was done, there was nothing left to do but act. I contacted the bank and removed Mike's access to my accounts, a finality in each click that felt both terrifying and liberating. The man I had married, the family I had tried to be a part of, they were all just strangers now. Strangers who had used me, who had seen my generosity as something to exploit rather than cherish. I packed my bags with a robotic efficiency, each item a reminder of a dream I had to put away. There was no going back from this, no gentle words or apologies that could mend the rift that his betrayal had caused. Mike had chosen his path, and in doing so, he had set me on mine. The ring I'd once worn with pride lay cold and heavy in my palm. I set it down on the counter, its sparkle mocking in the morning light, and with one last look at the life I was leaving behind, I closed the door on the house that was never truly a home. It was late afternoon when I finally left the house. My car was packed with clothes and essentials, a stark reminder of the sudden turn my life had taken. As I drove, the messages began to flood in. One from Mike, several from his mother. I pulled over to read them, knowing they'd only fuel the fire of my resolve. Mike's message read, "Jane, please, we need to talk about this. Can't we just discuss it?" His words seemed hollow, almost insulting in their simplicity. I started to type a response, then stopped. No words would bridge the chasm between us. His mother's messages were a mix of confusion and anger. "What's going on? Why have you canceled our rooms? Call me." I imagined her sitting in a cafe in Paris, expecting luxury and finding complication. I turned the phone off. They were in the middle of a trip funded by deceit. They could figure it out. My first stop was the bank. I needed to ensure my finances were completely secure. The bank manager, a middle-aged woman with a gentle face, greeted me. "I need to make sure all my accounts are locked down. My husband. He won't have access anymore, I explained, my voice steady despite the emotion I felt. Of course, she nodded, offering a sympathetic smile. Let's make sure you're protected. By the time I left the bank, my accounts were secure, and a new sense of determination settled within me. I drove to my sister's house, the only place I felt I could go. She opened the door before I could even knock. Jane, I've been so worried, she said, pulling me into a hug. I allowed myself a moment to just be held, to let the reality of my situation be shared. I can't believe he would do this to you, she said as we sat down at her kitchen table. You deserve so much better. I nodded, swallowing hard against the lump in my throat. I do, and that's why I'm not going back. I've canceled everything. I've left the house. I'm done, Sarah. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Good for you. What's your plan now? I looked around the familiar room, feeling the first twinge of relief. I'm not sure yet, but I'm starting with a divorce. I can't stay married to someone who has so little respect for me. Sarah's face was a mixture of anger and pride. I'll support you however I can. Do you need a lawyer? I'll find one, I said, my voice growing firmer with each word. I need someone who doesn't know Mike or his family. I need this cut clean. The conversation shifted as Sarah helped me unpack my car and make plans for the next few days. There was a strange comfort in the mundane tasks, a grounding in the midst of chaos. I was standing in the kitchen at my sister's house, a mug of coffee warming my hands when my phone vibrated with a persistence that felt all too familiar. It was Mike, again. Jane, we need to talk. I'm sorry, I miss you, and I think we can work things out. His text read, a mixture of apology and plea. I sighed, the same rehearsed, I'm sorry, becoming a threadbare blanket that no longer provided comfort or warmth. Not this time, Mike, I muttered under my breath, typing a response that left no room for ambiguity. There's nothing left to discuss. Please respect my decision. I could almost hear the desperation in the silence that followed, but it wasn't enough to make me reconsider. Not anymore. My resolve was tested further when, a few days later, Mike's parents made a dramatic appearance at my sister's doorstep. Their faces were twisted in anger as they barged past Sarah, who stood wide-eyed at the door. You've got some nerve, Jane, his mother exclaimed, her voice shrill. You ruined our family vacation. You're just a greedy, selfish woman. Sarah stepped between us, her stance protective. That's enough! You're not going to come into my house and insult my sister. The argument escalated until the neighbors peeked out of their windows, and I was sure someone would call the police. It ended with Sarah threatening to do just that if they didn't leave. Their departure left a sour air that lingered long after they were gone. But amidst the chaos, a realization settled within me. I was truly done. The divorce process was a cold, legal ballet, and I danced my part, signing papers and nodding through explanations of settlements and divisions. But with each stroke of the pen, I felt a chain breaking, a tether loosening. And then it was over. I stood outside the courthouse, a free woman. The air was crisp, a gentle wind playing with the loose strands of my hair. Sarah hugged me tight, her support unwavering. You did it, Jane, she whispered, pride evident in her voice. I had done it. I had stood up to the selfishness that tried to claim me, stood firm against the manipulation that sought to keep me bound. I turned away from the courthouse, away from a past that no longer held me. The messages from Mike continued for a while, a mix of apologies, bargaining, and eventually anger. But they went unread, floating in the digital void as I moved forward with my life. The apartment I rented was small, but bathed in sunlight. I filled it with plants, books, and new memories. I went back to school, enrolling in classes that fueled a passion for learning that I'd neglected. And one quiet evening, as I sat on my little balcony, a cup of tea in hand, I deleted Mike's number from my phone. I was free. Free to heal, free to grow, and most importantly, free to be unapologetically me. I'm Emily. I was a 25-year-old living a quiet, unremarkable existence with my boyfriend Mike, in a relationship that had seen better days. We'd been together since college, a pair drawn together more by familiarity than by the fervent passion of star-crossed lovers. Our arguments were frequent, often about Mike's disinterest in planning for the future or his latest gaming marathon that would last well into the early hours, leaving me to sleep alone. We were two people dancing around the inevitable conversation of, "Where is this going?" without ever actually taking the floor. It's not that we didn't care for each other. It's just that somewhere along the line, we stopped trying to make it work. My parents, Sue and George, were the antithesis of us. Married for over 30 years, they still exchanged loving glances and shared private jokes, their bond seemingly unbreakable. They were my foundation, the steadfast love I aspired to find for myself, even if it wasn't going to be with Mike. On the evening of the crash, I remember arguing with Mike over something as trivial as unsorted laundry. He had promised to do it, and once again, the promise was as empty as the laundry basket was full. "Can't you just do one thing you say you're going to do?" I had asked, exasperation straining my voice. "It's just laundry, Em. It'll get done. Eventually," he had replied, his attention fixed on his computer screen. The argument had fizzled out as they usually did, with neither of us truly addressing the underlying issues. Later, as I sat in the back seat of my parents' car, the warmth of their chatter was a soothing balm to the residual frustration from the argument with Mike. They were celebrating another year of Mom's life, and their joy was infectious. Then, the world turned on its axis. Headlights merged with the sound of metal on metal, and everything went black. When I awoke, it was to the antiseptic smell of a hospital, the relentless beeping of the heart monitor, and a heavy blanket of dread. The doctor's words were clinical and detached, but the message was clear. My parents didn't make it, and my legs, my perfectly normal, taken-for-granted legs, might never carry me again. The truth settled like a stone in my stomach. I was suddenly, terrifyingly alone. Mike, the man I had just argued with about laundry, was now my only connection to a life before the crash. The life where my biggest worry was whether he'd sort the whites from the colors. As the reality of my parents' absence and my potential paralysis began to truly register, a hollow despair took root in me. The future, once a landscape of possibilities, now seemed like a barren field. The hospital room was a bubble where time moved both too quickly and not at all. After what seemed like an eternity of white walls and echoing silence, Mike walked in, his parents, Janet and Bob, a step behind him. The atmosphere was thick with a somberness that made my heart sink even lower, if that was possible. Mike pulled a chair up next to my bed and took my hand, his usual bravado absent. His parents stood by the door, a united front of awkward concern. "Hey, Em," Mike began, his voice a rough whisper. "I've been doing some thinking, a lot of thinking, actually." "Thinking?" I echoed, my voice dull. "About what?" "About us," he said, and his eyes met mine, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. All of this, it's made me see how short life can be." I wanted to say something, to ask what he meant, but the words seemed to stick in my throat. "I don't want to wait for the perfect moment anymore because it might never come," he continued, squeezing my hand. "What I'm trying to say is, will you marry me, Emily?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. It was the last thing I thought I'd hear, especially now. I searched his face for a sign of the impulsive Mike I knew, the one who acted first and thought later. But all I saw was earnestness. His mother, Janet, stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. "We want you to be a part of our family, Emily. We'll take care of you." "And it's not out of pity," Bob added quickly. "It's because we love you, and we want to support Mike in taking this step." I was stunned, my mind racing. This was a lifeline, unexpected, and maybe even a little reckless, but a lifeline nonetheless. I looked at Mike, really looked at him, and saw not just my sometimes immature boyfriend, but a man offering his support in the most uncertain time of my life. "Mike, My voice trailed off as I tried to gather my thoughts. "It's okay, Em. You don't have to decide right now. I just wanted you to know how I feel," he said, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of my hand. I thought about my parents, about the unwavering love and support they had always shown me. Wasn't this what they would have wanted? For me to be loved and cared for no matter what? Mike, I don't know what the future holds for me, for us. But yes, I found myself saying, the words stronger than I felt. Yes, I'll marry you. A smile, the first genuine one I'd seen in days, spread across Mike's face. Janet let out a soft sob, covering her mouth with her hand, and even Bob's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Moving into my parents' house with Mike should have been a fresh start, a new chapter. The house was too big for just one person, and everywhere I looked, I saw memories of my parents. I thought having Mike with me would fill some of those empty spaces, but I was quickly learning that his presence was a reminder of what was missing, not a replacement. The first few days, he was attentive, always checking on me, making sure I had everything I needed within reach. But as days turned into weeks, the attentive husband act began to wear thin. Mike started spending more time on his computer, his headphones on, shutting me out. One evening, as I maneuvered my wheelchair into the kitchen, I found him staring blankly at his screen. "Mike, have you thought about looking for a new job?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "The insurance won't cover everything, and the bills are starting to pile up." He didn't look away from the screen. "I told you, Em, I'm taking care of you now. That's my job." "But I can take care of myself during the day," I pushed back, feeling a twinge of frustration. "You don't need to be here all the time." Finally, he turned to face me, his expression a mix of irritation and something else I couldn't quite read. "What do you want from me, Em? I'm here, aren't I?" I was taken aback by his tone. "Being physically here isn't the same as being present, Mike. I need a partner, not just a roommate." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the tile. "You know what, Em? Maybe I need more than this too. Maybe I wasn't cut out to be a nursemaid." His words stung, and I watched him storm out, the door slamming behind him. I was left alone in the silence of the kitchen, the weight of his words settling around me like dust. I wasn't just alone, I was lonely. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but think about how quickly our modest honeymoon period had ended. The vows we had taken felt like they were from another lifetime. The Mike who had lovingly promised to be by my side, in sickness and in health, seemed like a stranger now. As the weeks dragged on, his absences grew longer, and the excuses more flimsy. He was either out with friends or lost in a digital world that didn't seem to have room for me. I felt like an obstacle in his life, a burden he hadn't anticipated. One particularly tough day, when the pain was bad, and the house felt more like a mausoleum than a home, I heard the front door open. Expecting Mike, I called out, "Is that you?" "Yeah, it's me," he replied, his voice distant. "I'm just grabbing a few things, then I'm heading out again." I wheeled myself to the hallway, watching as he rifled through a drawer for his keys. "Going out with friends?" I asked, trying to mask the hurt in my voice. He paused, keys in hand, and sighed. "Em, I need some space, okay? It's not easy for me either, all this." I nodded, biting back tears. "I know. I just thought we could maybe spend some time together, like we used to." He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "Maybe when things settle down a bit, I gotta go." The house felt emptier with each passing day, a vast space filled with silence and the ghost of better times. It wasn't just Mike's absence or the silence left in the wake of my parents' voices. It was the small things that started to go missing. A vase my mother loved, a silver frame holding a family photo, a painting that used to hang in the hallway. I first noticed it when I was trying to distract myself with memories. I wheeled myself into the living room, intent on looking through the photo albums. But as my eyes scanned the room, they fell on the bare patch of wall where the painting had been. Confusion knotted my brow. "Mike!" I called out, unsure when he had last gone out. There was no answer, and the emptiness of the house seemed to echo back at me. That evening, when Mike returned, I asked him, "Have you seen the landscape painting that used to be in the hallway?" He barely glanced up from his phone. "Oh, that old thing? Yeah, it was getting dusty, and I figured we could use the space for something else." Something about his casual dismissal didn't sit right with me. "But it was my mom's favorite," I said, a tremor of unease in my voice. He shrugged, his attention still half on his screen. "We can get another painting, Em. It's no big deal. But it was a big deal. The items that went missing next were unmistakable, things that had been in my family for years. One afternoon, I caught Janet, Mike's mom, in the act. She was bustling around the living room with a big black garbage bag. "Janet, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharp with alarm. She jumped, a guilty flush creeping up her neck. "Oh, just some spring cleaning, dear. This place is cluttered with so many old things." "But those are my things," I protested, my heart rate picking up. There, she cooed, her voice sickly sweet. "We're just making things nicer for you. You'll thank us later." I watched her like a hawk every time she visited after that, but the thefts became sneakier, more calculated. And every time I brought it up, I was met with reassurances that it was all in my best interest. One night, lying in bed, I turned to Mike, who was scrolling through his phone, as had become his nighttime ritual. "Mike, your parents have been taking things from the house. My things." He didn't look up. "Mom's just trying to help. You know she's got a knack for this stuff." "Help?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my tone. "By taking my parents' belongings?" He sighed, finally setting his phone down and turning to face me. "Look, Em, they think we should be looking forward, not backward. They're just trying to take some of the load off you." I wanted to scream, to rage against the violation, the disrespect. But I was tired of fighting, tired of questioning my own sanity. "This isn't what I want," I whispered, the fight draining out of me. Mike reached over and patted my hand, a gesture that felt more patronizing than comforting. "Try to get some sleep, Em. Things will look better in the morning." I couldn't take it anymore and confided in Anna, my closest friend who was also a massage therapist. She had been helping with my rehabilitation, her visits a rare source of relief. "Anna, things are going missing around the house," I confided as she worked on my stiff muscles. "And I can't shake the feeling that Mike and his parents are behind it." Anna paused, her hands stilling on my shoulders. "Have you talked to Mike about this?" "I have, but he just brushes it off. Says his parents are helping us by decluttering." I let out a hollow laugh. "But it's only my family's things that are disappearing." Anna's brows furrowed in concern. "That doesn't sound right, Em. Do you want me to do something? Maybe come by more often? Keep an eye out?" The idea sparked something in me, a plan forming from the embers of my frustration. "Could you, I don't know, maybe help me set up some sort of camera or something to record what's going on when I'm not in the room?" With a nod of determination, Anna agreed. "I'll bring something over tomorrow. We'll get to the bottom of this." True to her word, Anna came back the next day with some discreet recording devices, which she placed in strategic locations around the house. It felt like something out of a spy movie, and if I wasn't so desperate for the truth, I might have laughed at the absurdity of it all. A few days later, Anna returned with the recordings, and we sat down to listen. The voices of Mike and his parents filled the room, and the blood in my veins turned to ice as their scheme unfolded through their casual conversation. "And once we get her committed, the house and everything in it will be ours," Mike's voice said, clear and cold. "Yeah, the place will sell for a fortune, and all those antiques? Pure profit," his mother added, her tone greedy. "We just need to make sure Emily doesn't catch on before we have everything in place," his father chimed in. Tears streamed down my face as I listened to their betrayal. These people, who had promised to care for me, to be my family, were plotting against me. Anna reached over, her hand gripping mine tightly. "We have to do something, Em," she said, her voice laced with anger. I wiped my eyes, the sorrow quickly giving way to a steely resolve. "We will. I'm not going to let them get away with this." The morning after listening to the recordings, I tried to act normal, but every word they said, every smile they gave, felt like a lie. It was during breakfast when I noticed something was off. The usual noise of the city that drifted in through the open window was absent. I wheeled myself over to see what was happening, only to find that the ramps that allowed me access to the garden were gone. "Mike!" I called out, my voice laced with panic. "Where are the ramps?" He came into the room, feigning ignorance. "The ramps? Oh, they were looking a bit worn. Thought they needed fixing." I stared at him, the man I thought I knew. And you didn't think to tell me? How am I supposed to get around? His gaze was evasive as he shrugged. I just thought you'd be safer inside for now. You know, until we get new ones. The room felt like it was spinning, and it wasn't from my injury. Safer? Or trapped? The words slipped out before I could stop them. He didn't respond, just turned and walked away, leaving me stewing in a mix of anger and helplessness. Later, when I asked Janet about it, she was syrupy sweet with false concern. We're just looking out for you, dear. We wouldn't want you to have an accident, she said, touching my shoulder with feigned tenderness. I pulled away from her touch, feeling the sting of their deceit. I didn't realize needing ramps qualified as a hazard, I replied, my voice steady though my insides were shaking. Janet's eyes hardened for a moment before she regained her composure. We're just trying to help, Emily. It's for the best. That night, as I lay in bed, the darkness felt oppressive. Mike was out again, probably drowning his guilt in cheap beer and cheaper thrills. I reached for my phone, the screen a small beacon in the dark, and dialed the number Anna had given me for emergencies. Anna, I whispered when she picked up. They've removed the ramps. I'm literally trapped in my own home. Her voice was firm, a lifeline in the tumultuous sea I was drowning in. Hang tight, Em. I'm going to make some calls. We're going to sort this out. Next day, I was in the kitchen when I heard the doorbell. My heart pounded as I maneuvered towards the entrance. It was Anna, flanked by a man and woman wearing crisp suits and stern expressions. They were from a local disability rights organization, here to assess my living situation. Beside them was my lawyer, Mr. Hammond, clutching a leather briefcase. Emily, we're here to make things right, Anna said, her determination matching the resolve in my chest. Mr. Hammond stepped forward. We need to establish the facts first, Emily. I'll need to see the house. Check against the inventory of your parents' belongings. As we moved through the house, the representatives from the service took notes, their disapproval clear at the missing ramps and the blatant disregard for my welfare. Mike walked in during the commotion, surprise etching his face. Em, what's going on? Who are these people? I looked at him, really looked at him, allowing the full weight of my gaze to settle on his shoulders. I'm taking back control, Mike. This is my lawyer, and these are advocates for people with disabilities. They're here to ensure my home is safe and that my rights are respected. Janet and Bob entered the fray, confusion turning to fear as they realized the seriousness of the situation. Emily, darling, what is this about? Janet's voice trembled. It's about my rights, my home, and the truth, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Mr. Hammond is here to confirm the inventory of my inheritance. Mr. Hammond opened his briefcase, pulling out documents and photographs. We have detailed records of all items bequeathed to Mrs. Harper. It seems several are missing. Bob's face paled. Now, Emily, I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I replied, the recordings Anna had provided playing in my head. And I have more than just missing items to discuss. Mike's parents looked at each other, the facade of the caring in-laws crumbling before my eyes. Mike stood there, silent, the reality of the situation dawning on him. Anna moved closer to me. We also have evidence of the conversations you've had regarding Emily's property and well-being. The advocates from the Disability Service spoke up. Removing access to the ramps is a direct violation of Mrs. Harper's rights. We'll be taking action. As Mr. Hammond laid out the evidence of their theft and their plans for my future, I saw the trap I had been in from the outside. But now, the tables had turned. I was no longer the victim in their game. I was the one calling the shots. Mike finally found his voice. I can explain. But I shook my head. Save it, Mike. I've heard enough. Janet started to cry, and Bob put an arm around her, but there was no comfort to be found in their deceit. The day of the trial was a culmination of everything I had endured. The courtroom was stark, the air thick with tension. Mike and his parents were on one side, looking nothing like the family that had once promised to care for me. I was on the other, with Anna beside me and Mr. Hammond at the ready, with his briefcase of evidence. As the proceedings began, the judge looked down at us from his bench, his gaze lingering on me for a moment. We are here to examine the evidence regarding the allegations of theft and the premeditated exploitation of Emily Harper, he said. Mr. Hammond presented the recordings, the inventory discrepancies, and testimonies from the disability advocates. The evidence was damning, and Mike's family could do little but squirm under the weight of their own deceit. Janet sobbed quietly, her sobs a soundtrack to the unraveling of their scheme. "We never meant for things to go this far," she whispered when it was her turn to speak. The judge's voice was firm as he addressed them. "You took advantage of a vulnerable person. There's no excuse for your actions." Mike stood, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Em. I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at him, the history we shared playing out in a flash before my eyes. "Sorry isn't enough, Mike. You chose this path." The gavel came down like the final word on the life I had once known. Mike and his parents were found guilty. Reparations were ordered, and they were to have no further contact with me. With the help of Anna and a dedicated team, I started physical therapy. Each small movement was a victory, each step a testament to my resilience. My legs, once lifeless, began to tingle with new strength. One day, as I managed to stand with the help of parallel bars, Anna cheered me on. "Look at you, Em, you're doing it!" The smile on my face was mirrored in her own. "I am, aren't I?" The joy bubbled up from a place I thought had been broken beyond repair. And so, I moved forward, one day at a time. The house, once a mausoleum of my past life, was slowly transformed back into a home, a sanctuary where I healed and grew stronger. I'm Liz, and by some twist of fate, I'm married to the most amazing guy I've ever met, Alex. We're both 28, got our own place, pay our bills, and live a life that's ours. It's been a year since we said I do, and honestly, life's been good, except for one little thing: Alex's parents. Now, don't get me wrong, I never expected to be the daughter-in-law in shining armor, but I also didn't expect to be the family's unwanted guest. The day I met my in-laws, it felt like walking into a lion's den with a stake tied to my neck. My mother-in-law, Jane, had this way of looking at me, like she was trying to figure out if I was more of a nuisance or just plain boring. I could tell she had sized me up and found me lacking before I even had a chance to say hello. Alex had warned me about his mom. "She can be a bit much," he said, as we drove to their place that first time. "But don't take it to heart, okay?" I didn't. Or at least I tried not to. At dinner, I was passing the salt when Jane said, "You know, Stephanie used to cook such wonderful meals. Remember that risotto, honey?" She said to Alex, who just nodded, his jaw tight. "Yeah, I remember," he replied, not looking at me. I sat there, salt shaker in hand, feeling like I was invisible. They all talked about Stephanie as if I wasn't there. I felt a pang in my chest, but I swallowed it down with a smile. "Sounds like she was a great cook," I said, trying to seem unaffected. Jane's eyes met mine, and she smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, she was. She was a lot of things." That night, I told Alex how I felt. "It's like she's measuring me against some ghost." Alex hugged me close. "You're the one I chose, Liz. That's all that matters." I wanted to believe him, but as I'd learned, Jane had a long game in mind, and I was the pawn she was eager to sacrifice. I just didn't know it yet. Living with an allergy isn't just inconvenient. It's like having a shadow that's constantly whispering danger in your ear. Since I was a kid, peanuts have been my arch nemesis. It started with a spoonful of peanut paste and a trip to the emergency room that left my parents with a crystal clear message. Keep her away from peanuts and a whole host of other foods if you want her to grow up. It's not just peanuts, though. Soy, peas, cherries, almonds, tomatoes, apricots, bananas, and even potatoes, they're all off limits. It's a list that makes waiters raise an eyebrow and friends hesitate to invite me over for dinner. It's also a list that my mother-in-law, Jane, knows by heart, yet she somehow manages to question every single time we're over for dinner. "Are you sure you can't even have a little bit of this pie? It's got almond extract," she'd ask, with a tone that hovered between concern and disbelief. I would smile politely, though I'd rather not, and say, "Yeah, I'm sure. Thanks, though." It was the same dance every time. I remember once, at a family gathering, I was navigating the buffet, a mental checklist running through my head. Alex was by my side, plate in hand, trying to help me find something safe to eat. That's when Jane swooped in, her voice sickly sweet. "Liz, you must try this casserole. I made sure it was Liz-friendly," she announced, but the glint in her eye didn't match her nurturing words. Alex paused, his fork mid-air. "Mom, you used cream of mushroom soup in this, right?" he asked, knowing full well that many brands included soy, a big no-no for me. Jane's smile faltered for a second. "Oh, I think so. It should be fine." But it wasn't fine, and we both knew it. We made our excuses, me leaving the casserole untouched. But the incident stuck with me. It was a small victory in what felt like an ongoing battle, a battle where Jane held all the cards because she controlled the kitchen. I've learned to navigate this world with careful steps. Eating out is a strategic operation. Alex and I were at our favorite Italian place, a rare find that understood the gravity of food allergies. I'd recited my usual spiel to the waiter, who nodded understandingly. Alex watched me with those soft eyes of his, the ones that said he'd do anything to make my life easier. "You okay?" he asked, after the waiter left. "Yeah, I'm fine. I just hate making a fuss," I replied, folding my napkin on my lap. "You're not making a fuss. You're making sure you don't, die," he said, half joking, half serious. I laughed, a short, grateful sound. "Well, when you put it that way..." After dinner, as we walked under the clear night sky, I felt light, happy. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Jane. Her words were like a cloud over the moon, darkening the moment. "Be careful, Liz. Not everyone takes your condition seriously. Wouldn't want anything to happen to you." I read the text to Alex, who wrapped an arm around me, pulling me close. "She's just trying to get to you," he said. But as much as I wanted to shrug it off, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's message was more than just a jab. It was a warning, a reminder that my allergy made me vulnerable, not just to food, but to people like her, who saw it as a weakness to be exploited. The rest of the walk home, I couldn't help but think about all the close calls, all the accidental exposures, and how easily something could go wrong. It wasn't just the peanuts, or the soy, or the peas. It was the realization that my allergy was more than a personal battle. It was a chink in my armor that someone like Jane could see as an opportunity. And that thought was scarier than any allergic reaction I'd ever had. Dinners at Jane's house were always a production, like a play where everyone knew their parts except me. I was the wild card, the one who could unintentionally cause a scene with a single bite. Alex tried to make it better, but there's only so much you can do when you're playing in someone else's home court. One particular evening, the tension was as thick as the gravy on the table. Jane was bustling around, placing dish after dish on the table. I sat there, my own plate empty, waiting to figure out what I could eat without a trip to the hospital. "Alex, darling, pass the green beans to Liz. They're just divine," Jane said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that didn't reach her eyes. I eyed the beans, but something seemed off. "What's in them?" I asked. "Oh, just a touch of almond slivers for crunch," she said, waving a hand dismissively. I put my hand up, stopping Alex's reach. "I can't eat those, remember? Almonds are a no-go for me." Jane feigned surprise, a hand to her chest. "Oh dear, I must have forgotten. Silly me." Alex's chair scraped back as he stood up. "Mom, this is serious. Liz could end up in the hospital." His voice was firm, edged with a frustration that made Jane's eyes narrow just a little. "I just wanted to make something nice," she said. "It's not my fault Liz has all these allergies." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The other relatives glanced around, forks paused midair, not sure where to look. I felt a flush creeping up my neck, embarrassed by the spotlight. Alex's dad, Mark, tried to break the tension. "Let's just enjoy the meal, shall we? There's plenty Liz can eat." But the damage was done. The rest of the dinner passed in strained politeness, with Jane asking pointed questions about my allergies, as if she were taking notes for next time. Later, when Alex and I were alone, he apologized. "I'm sorry, Liz. I should have double-checked everything before we came." I shook my head, tired of feeling like a problem to be managed. "It's not your fault, but I'm starting to think your mom does these things on purpose." He didn't answer, and he didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Jane was serving up a side of malice with every meal, and I was the main course. I could always tell when Jane had been working on Alex. He'd get this distant look in his eyes, like he was seeing me, but also seeing through me, weighing her words against his own judgment. This particular evening, it was like a cloud had settled over him, and I knew it before he even said a word. "Mom thinks we should consider..." "Well, she thinks we might not be thinking about the future enough," Alex muttered, not meeting my eye as he fumbled with the TV remote. "The future?" I asked, a sinking feeling in my gut. "Yeah, kids and your health issues," he continued, the word issues hanging awkwardly in the air between us. I felt a tightness in my chest. "She talked to you about my allergies again, didn't she?" He sighed, setting the remote down. "She's just worried, Liz. She thinks it's a lot for us to handle, especially if we want a family." I bristled. "We've talked about this. I've managed so far, haven't I? And there are plenty of people with allergies who have kids." Alex ran a hand through his hair, a sure sign he was stressed. I know. It's just... she has this way of making me doubt things." The room was quiet for a moment, the tension thick. I watched him, this man I loved, wrestling with the seeds of doubt his mother had planted. "Alex, do you doubt us?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "No." He looked up, finally, his eyes clear and firm. "No, I don't. I just hate that she keeps bringing it up. I hate that it makes us fight." I reached for his hand, our fingers intertwining. "We're not fighting. We're on the same side, remember?" He nodded, pulling me into a hug. "You and me against the world, right?" "Right," I said, but as I held him, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's words were like weeds, threatening to grow wild and choke the life out of the beautiful thing we had. And I knew then that it wasn't just my allergies that needed managing. It was the doubts that could seep into the cracks of even the strongest relationships. The news of my pregnancy came as a surprise, a happy one for Alex and me, a complicated one for everyone else. The day we announced it to his parents, Jane's reaction was like watching a robot trying to mimic human emotions. A pause, then a smile that didn't quite match the situation. "We're going to have a baby, Mom," Alex said, his voice a mix of pride and caution as he gauged his mother's reaction. "That's wonderful," Jane managed to say, the words sounding foreign in her mouth. "We must have a family dinner to celebrate." I was skeptical. Celebrations at Jane's were never just celebrations, but I saw the hopeful look in Alex's eyes and agreed. The night of the dinner, the house was buzzing with relatives. Jane was the perfect hostess, floating from guest to guest with a grace that felt almost genuine. When she reached us, her smile was practiced. "Congratulations, Liz," she said. "This is such a joyous occasion." "Thank you, Jane," I replied, trying to match her formality. "We're excited." Alex wrapped his arm around my waist, a silent thank you for playing along. As dinner approached, I felt the familiar anxiety. A table full of food was a minefield for me, but tonight, I hoped, would be different. The table was a feast, dishes upon dishes laid out, and I felt every eye on me as I hesitated, my hand hovering over the options. "Go on, dear," Jane urged. "Eat up. You're eating for two now." I smiled weakly, choosing the safest options, vegetables and rice, plain and simple. But as I reached for a slice of bread, Jane stopped me. "Actually, maybe not that one," she said quickly. "I'm not sure if the baker used soy flour." I paused, bread in hand, and met her gaze. There was a flicker of something there. Concern, or was it a challenge? "Thank you for letting me know," I said, putting the bread down. But the warning bells were already ringing in my head. How did she know about the soy flour? It seemed too close a call, too perfect a save. The rest of the meal passed in a blur, congratulations mingling with the clinking of glasses. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's hospitality was a veneer, and beneath it lay a trap, set and waiting for just the right moment. The family dinner in honor of our future baby was nothing short of a banquet. Jane had outdone herself, and there was a spread that would make a Thanksgiving dinner look modest. But my stomach was in knots, not from hunger, but from fear. Every dish was a potential hazard, a hidden enemy that could send me to the hospital, or worse. As we all took our seats, the chatter around the table was lively, filled with the usual family gossip and stories. Jane was at the head of the table, presiding over the feast like a queen in her court. She called everyone to attention with a gentle tap of her glass. Before we begin, I just want to say how thrilled we are to be celebrating Liz and Alex's upcoming addition to our family, Jane announced, her voice steady and clear. There was a round of hear, hear, and applause. I forced a smile, feeling Alex squeeze my hand under the table. Thank you, everyone, I said. We're really looking forward to this new chapter in our lives. The meal began, and I tentatively picked at my food, choosing the simplest items. Alex watched me, his brow furrowed with concern. You doing okay? He asked quietly. Yeah, just being careful, I replied, pushing a roasted potato around my plate. Jane's eyes were on me, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. Liz, you haven't touched your salad. The dressing is on the side, just as you like it, she said, her voice tinged with a forced cheerfulness. Thank you, Jane. I'm just not much of an appetite tonight, I said, avoiding the salad that I knew could easily contain hidden allergens. As the dinner wore on, the tension grew. Every time Jane offered me something, my anxiety spiked. The room felt hot, the walls inching closer with each passing minute. Then came the cake. It was a beautiful confection, layers of sponge and cream that made the room ooh and ah. Jane cut a slice and handed it to me with a smile that might have been genuine if I hadn't known better. For the mom-to-be, she said. I looked at the cake, then at Alex, then at Jane. I really shouldn't, I said, but it looks delicious. Oh, come on, Liz. One little bite won't hurt. For the baby, Jane pressed, her voice sweet as the icing. That's when Alex's dad, Mark, stepped in, his hand swift as he knocked the plate from my hands. The cake tumbled to the floor, and a stunned silence fell over the room. What the hell, Dad? Alex exclaimed, his voice a mix of anger and confusion. Mark stood, his face pale but his voice firm. I saw the label in the trash. That cake has peanut oil in it. The room erupted in chaos. Jane's face was the picture of shock, but her eyes gave her away. There was a flash of something there. Fear, maybe? Guilt? Alex stood, his chair clattering behind him. Mom, did you know about this? He demanded. Jane's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. And in that moment, the truth was as clear as the danger that had been on my plate. The room was dead silent after Mark's revelation, the dropped cake like a crime scene on the hardwood floor. Everyone's eyes were locked on Jane, who seemed to shrink under the collective gaze. Mom, is it true? Did you know? Alex's voice cut through the tension, sharp and demanding. Jane's eyes flickered with something dark before she regained her composure. Of course not. I would never. Her voice trailed off, unconvincing. Mark wasn't having any of it. I saw the shopping list, Jane. Peanut oil for cake. It was right there, in your handwriting, he said, his voice steady but laced with disappointment. The murmurs around the table grew louder, a mix of disbelief and anger bubbling up from the family. Alex was shaking his head, his hands balled into fists. How could you, Mom? Liz could have died. I was frozen in my seat, the gravity of the situation anchoring me down. This wasn't just carelessness or forgetfulness, it was intentional. Jane's mask finally slipped, her face twisted in anger. I didn't want it to come to this, but she's not right for you, Alex. She's weak, and now she's bringing a child into this world who will be just like her. Alex took a step toward his mother, incredulous. Weak? Liz is the strongest person I know. And you? How could you be so cruel? I could feel the eyes on me, waiting for me to break down, to crumble under the weight of Jane's words. But I didn't. Jane, I said, my voice surprisingly calm, you've made your feelings very clear. But this is not just about me. This is about a family, your grandchild. Jane looked away, her jaw clenched, and for the first time, I saw the hint of fear in her eyes. Maybe she realized that her actions hadn't just endangered me, but her relationship with her son, her reputation, everything. The rest of the evening was a blur. There were arguments, tears, and hushed conversations as the family tried to process what had happened. Alex and I left early, the weight of the evening heavy on our shoulders. We didn't speak much on the drive home. What was there to say? The truth was out, and with it, the facade of a polite, if not happy family was shattered, all because of a peanut. The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that's heavy, filled with things unsaid. When we finally walked through our front door, Alex and I just stood there, the echo of the night's drama still ringing in our ears. Alex was the first to break the silence. "I can't believe my own mother would do something like that," he said, his voice hollow. I sat down on the couch, the cushion failing to comfort me. "I know, it's a lot to take in." He sat beside me, taking my hands in his. "I'm so sorry, Liz. It's unforgivable." I looked at him, seeing the pain in his eyes, and my heart ached. "It's not your fault, Alex. We couldn't have known she'd go this far." But the truth was there, hanging between us. Jane had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The family was in pieces. Some stood by us, shocked and appalled by Jane's actions, while others struggled to wrap their heads around the reality of the situation. The next few days were a whirlwind. Alex's phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls. Relatives wanted to express their shock, their support, their apologies. And through it all, there was a deafening silence from Jane. No apologies, no explanations, nothing. Alex finally broke the news to me a week later. "Dad's left her. He can't get past what she did. He said it's been a long time coming." I wasn't sure how to feel. Relief, sadness, pity? "And Jane?" I asked tentatively. "He said she's not handling it well. She's alone now," Alex replied, a twinge of something like regret in his tone. We sat in our living room, the walls we'd painted together, the furniture we'd picked out during countless trips to the store. It was our home, filled with our memories, our love. And outside, there was a storm brewing, one that threatened to uproot everything we knew. But in that moment, I realized that no matter what happened, we had each other. We were a team, about to bring a new life into the world, and that was what mattered. "I love you, Liz," Alex said, pulling me close. "I love you too," I whispered back. The fallout from that night would linger. The scars it left on our family would take time to heal. But as I looked at Alex, at the life we'd built, and the future we were about to embark on, I knew that we'd weather any storm together. And as for Jane, she was a chapter in our lives that we had closed, a story that we wouldn't let define us. From now on, it was just us, our baby, and the road ahead. Whatever it brought, we'd face it together. My name is Sarah, and this is my story. I'm married to Tom, a kind-hearted man with a smile that could light up the darkest room. We've been married for 4 years, but it feels like we've been together for a lifetime. We met at a local coffee shop, bumped into each other by accident, and the rest, as they say, is history. But there's one part of my life that feels more like a recurring bad dream. Martha, Tom's mom. Martha is, well, she's a character. Since we got married, she's had this habit of dropping by unannounced. It was annoying at first, but now it's just part of our daily routine. She's got something to say about everything and anything I do, and it's never praise. It was just another Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen, the aroma of roasted chicken filling the air, setting the table for 3. Tom was on his way home, and Martha, of course, decided to pop in. "Chicken, Sarah? Again?" Martha walked into the kitchen, her voice dripping with disappointment. "If it were me, I'd have made pork. Tom loves my pork roast." I tried to keep my cool. "Tom likes chicken too, Martha, and it's healthier." She clicked her tongue, moving closer to inspect the salad. "Lettuce and tomatoes. How original." Just then, Tom walked in. "Something smells good," he said, wrapping his arms around me. He kissed my cheek before noticing his mother. "Mom, what a surprise." "Not a good one, apparently," Martha muttered. eyeing the chicken like it had personally offended her. Tom caught my eye, a silent plea there. "Be nice to her," it said. "She's had a tough year." I sighed, the fight draining out of me. "Dinner's ready. Let's eat." We sat down, and the usual happened. Tom talked about his day. I chimed in with stories of my own, and Martha found a way to criticize every single thing. When Tom complimented the chicken, saying it was just as good as any pork roast, I saw Martha's lips thin, but for once, she kept quiet. That night, as Tom and I cleaned up and Martha watched her favorite game show in the living room, I wondered how many more dinners like this I could take. It wasn't the chicken or the pork that was the problem. It was the constant feeling of not being good enough for the woman who mattered most to Tom. But as I looked at Tom, who was whistling while drying the dishes, I knew I'd endure it, for him. Because that's what you do for love, right? You put up with a little rain to get to the rainbow. Or in my case, a little bit of Martha to get to the rest of my life with Tom. If life were a straight road, mine had taken a turn into a lane with speed bumps named Martha. When I found out I was pregnant, Tom and I were over the moon. But joy comes with its own set of challenges. My job as an event planner was demanding, with hours as unpredictable as Martha's mood swings. So I made the tough choice to step down to a less taxing role, which unfortunately meant a smaller paycheck. It was a Sunday morning, and I was flipping pancakes, humming to myself, feeling content. Tom was reading at the table, and then, as if on cue, Martha walked in, her presence immediately changing the air. "So, Sarah, how does it feel to contribute less to the household?" Martha didn't waste any time, going straight for the jugular as she poured herself a cup of coffee. I flipped another pancake, choosing my words carefully. "It feels responsible, Martha. I need to take care of myself and the baby." "Babies don't need money, huh? Interesting logic," she retorted, taking a sip and making a face. "This coffee is weak." Tom looked up, his brow furrowed. "Mom, that's not fair. Sarah is doing what's best for our family." Martha scoffed. "Oh, please. When I was pregnant, I worked until the day I gave birth, and I made sure to contribute equally." I plated the pancakes and sat down, trying to keep the peace. "Times are different now, Martha, and I'm still working, just not as much." She shook her head, her disapproval as clear as the sunny day outside. "You just make sure you don't get too comfortable. Money doesn't grow on trees." The conversation hung heavy over breakfast. Even the pancakes tasted like tension. Tom squeezed my hand under the table, a silent show of support. But as I watched Martha pick at her food with a sour expression, I knew this was far from over. I was bracing myself for a long road ahead, full of Martha's backhanded comments. But in my heart, I knew the peace of mind from a lesser-stressed pregnancy was worth any pay cut. And I'd do it all over again if it meant a healthier me and a healthier baby. Life has a funny way of flipping the script. Before Jamie, my home office was a place of tranquility. Now it's a circus, and I'm the juggler. Working from home while taking care of a newborn is like trying to thread a needle on a roller coaster. But it's our roller coaster, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. One Wednesday afternoon, as I was knee-deep in emails and baby burp cloths, the doorbell rang. I knew without looking. It was Martha. "Just a minute," I called out, balancing Jamie on one hip and my laptop on the other. When I opened the door, there she stood, purse and judgment in hand. "You look like you could use some help," she remarked, pushing past me into the living room. I followed her, settling Jamie into his bouncer. "I've got it under control, Martha. It's just a busy day." She peered at my laptop screen, then at Jamie, who was trying to decide if he was hungry or sleepy. "Doesn't seem like it. You know, when Tom was a baby, I made sure everything was spotless, and he was always my focus." I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to defend my scattered living room. "Well, times have changed, Martha. Working from home is a balancing act." She sat down, watching me like a hawk. "Does Tom know how chaotic it is here?" I sat across from her, trying to maintain a sense of calm. "Tom understands. He knows I'm doing my best." Martha tutted, looking around with thinly veiled disapproval. I suppose your best will have to do." I wanted to tell her that my best was more than enough, that I was a good mom and a good worker. But with Jamie starting to fuss, I didn't have the energy for another round with her. As she left, Martha's parting words were, "Remember, Sarah, a mother's place is with her child, not with her work." I closed the door gently, leaning against it for a moment. Her words stung, but as I picked up Jamie and he smiled, all gums and drool, I knew I was doing all right. Work can wait. These moments with Jamie cannot. And if that means my living room is a bit messy, so be it. It's our mess, and it's perfect. 4 years into our marriage, and life had settled into a rhythm, albeit one constantly interrupted by the discordant notes of my mother-in-law, Martha's visits. The first year of Jamie's life was a whirlwind of diapers, late-night lullabies, and the struggle of maintaining a career from the confines of our home. Now, as I stepped back into the professional arena, my heart ached with the separation from my little boy, but also fluttered with the excitement of reclaiming a piece of my identity. The office was just as I remembered, yet everything felt different. Colleagues welcomed me back with smiles and gentle inquiries about Jamie. My desk, once a shrine to efficiency, now also housed a colorful array of drawings and a photo of Jamie's toothless grin. Each email I sent was punctuated by thoughts of him, each project plan a reminder of the plans I had for his future. Arriving home that evening felt like crossing a finish line. I was greeted by the music of Jamie's giggles as Tom, ever the doting father, flew him around the living room like an airplane. They were in their own world, and for a moment, I was an outsider looking in. It was a pang of jealousy, only a mother returning to work could understand. Before I could even kick off my shoes, the door swung open, and Martha made her entrance. "Sarah, back to work I see. And Jamie?" she asked, her tone laced with accusation. "He's been at daycare, and he's doing great," I said, trying to keep my voice light as I took Jamie into my arms. She raised an eyebrow, a silent judgment I knew all too well. "Daycare? At his age? I never would have." Tom intervened. "Mom, the world's different now. We're doing what's right for our family." Martha huffed, moving to the kitchen. "Well, I hope you know what you're doing." The conversation hung in the air, a stalemate of generational differences. Tom and I exchanged a weary look. This was our normal, a delicate dance of defending our choices. Dinner was a quiet affair, Jamie's high chair an island of cheer in a sea of unspoken tensions. Martha barely touched her food, her disapproval a palpable presence at the table. Afterward, as Tom put Jamie to bed, I found myself alone with Martha. "Martha, I know you don't agree with our choices, but I need you to trust that we're doing what's best for Jamie," I said, clearing the plates. She looked at me, her eyes softening for just a second. "Sarah, I just want what's best for him too." "I know, and I appreciate that. But best can mean different things," I replied, hoping to bridge the gap between us. She nodded slowly. "I suppose you're right, but it doesn't mean I have to like it." As I finished the chores and sat down to catch up on some work, the house quieted down. I mulled over the day's events, the juggle between professional and personal, the constant scrutiny from Martha. Each thought was a thread in the complex tapestry of modern motherhood. Over the next few weeks, I found my stride, balancing deadlines with daycare drop-offs, boardroom meetings with bedtime stories. I was proving to myself, more than to Martha, that I could excel at both roles. But her words lingered like a shadow, a reminder of the tightrope I walked daily. One evening, as I watched Jamie sleep, his chest rising and falling in peaceful slumber, I realized that this was my why. The long hours, the missed cuddles, they were all for this moment of tranquility, for the future we were building. And as I turned off the light, a sense of determination settled in my heart. Martha might never understand, but that was okay. This was our life, our choices, our grind. And with Tom and Jamie by my side, I was ready for all of it. When Tom and I approached Martha about watching Jamie while I worked, she accepted with a strange spark in her eye. "Of course I'll watch him. A grandmother's place is with her grandchild," she had said, almost triumphantly. The first day, I left Jamie with her, armed with a list of instructions and a kiss on his forehead. "If you need anything, call me," I reminded her, feeling the familiar tug at my heart as I walked out the door. "Sarah, go to work. We'll be fine," Martha said, her voice tinged with the confidence that only grandmothers possess. But as the days passed, her enthusiasm began to wane. Each evening, I returned to a litany of complaints. "He wouldn't nap. He's too fidgety. He throws his food," she'd report with exasperation. One evening, as I handed her a cup of tea, I ventured cautiously, "Martha, if it's too much, we can look into a daycare for Jamie." She set her cup down with a clatter. "No, I don't trust those places. I'll watch him." "But you seem so tired, and I hate seeing you like this," I replied, concern lacing my words. Martha's eyes met mine, stubborn as ever. "I said no, Sarah. I'm his grandmother. It's my job to endure. And who better to look after him than family?" Her refusal was a familiar dance, one where my suggestions were met with resistance, my concerns with cold rebuttals. "Okay, Martha, if that's what you want," I acquiesced, knowing that arguing was futile. Each morning, I left Jamie in her care, my heart squeezed tight with worry. Each evening, I returned to find Martha a little more worn, a little less patient, but always insistent that she would continue caring for him. Her resilience was as admirable as it was frustrating. I watched her pour her love into Jamie, even as it drained her, and I was left in a constant state of gratitude and guilt. Tom and I would talk after Jamie's bedtime, turning over options in quiet conversation, but we always circled back to Martha's steadfast refusal to let anyone else take over. Just when I thought we had settled into our new normal with Martha looking after Jamie, the unthinkable happened. I was in the middle of a work presentation when my cell phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket. Excusing myself, I stepped out to see Martha's number on the screen. "Martha, I'm at work. Is everything okay?" I answered, my voice tight with concern. "Sarah, I can't do this today. You need to come and get Jamie. Now." Martha's voice was terse, frazzled. I felt a surge of anxiety. "What's wrong? Is Jamie all right?" "He's fine, but I'm not. I need you to come. I can't handle this," she insisted. Panic knotted my stomach. "I can't just leave work at a moment's notice, Martha. Can it wait until my lunch break?" There was a pause, and then, "You'll regret not coming," she said ominously, and hung up. My heart raced. I called back, no answer. I called the daycare to see if they could take Jamie last minute. They could, but I needed to drop him off. I rushed back to my presentation, my mind far from work. An hour later, as soon as I could, I hurried to my car, calling Martha again. Still no answer. Then, a call from an unknown number stopped me dead in my tracks. "Mrs. Thomas? This is Officer Daniels. We have Jamie here at the police station. A woman brought him in, said she couldn't care for him anymore." My breath caught in my throat. "I'll be right there." I sped to the station, thoughts whirling in chaos. Tom met me there, his face pale with worry. "Mr. and Mrs. Thomas?" The officer greeted us. "Your son is safe. The woman, she said she was the grandmother, left him here. She claimed she was feeling unwell." Relief flooded me at the sight of Jamie in the officer's arms, unharmed. "Thank you," I managed to say, taking Jamie into my embrace. Tom and I exchanged a look, the same question in our eyes. What do we do about Martha? We found her at home, sitting on the sofa, flipping through a magazine. "Mom, what happened? Why did you leave Jamie at the police station?" Tom's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. Martha looked up, unfazed. "I told Sarah I couldn't do it. I wasn't feeling well, and I needed rest." "But you left our son with the police," I exclaimed, still holding Jamie tightly. She shrugged. "I knew they'd find you. I just needed some peace and quiet." Tom ran his hands through his hair, frustration etched on his face. "You can't just abandon a child, Mom, especially not your grandson." Martha sighed, a theatrical display of exhaustion. "Well, I told you I needed you to come, Sarah. You should have come." The implication that this was my fault stung, and I realized then that Martha's manipulations knew no bounds. This wasn't just about her being tired or ill. It was about control. As we put Jamie to bed that night, his small frame snuggled between us. The severity of Martha's actions sank in. This was a breach of trust that couldn't be mended with apologies or excuses. We had to protect our little family, and unfortunately, that meant setting boundaries with Martha. She had taken her opposition to me too far, and we couldn't risk Jamie's safety on her whims. The morning after the police station incident, our house was steeped in a heavy silence. Tom and I sat at the kitchen table, cups of coffee untouched, while Jamie played with his toys on the floor, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. "We need to talk to her, Tom. What she did." I started, the anger from the night before simmering in my voice. Tom nodded, his face grim. "I know. I'll call her." He dialed Martha's number, and I could hear the faint sound of a ringtone from the living room where she slept. There was a click, and then her voice. "Tom, what is it?" "Mom, why didn't you tell us you were feeling unwell before taking Jamie to the police?" Tom's voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying strain. There was a pause on the other end. I just needed to rest. I thought they would call you immediately." Martha's voice was a mix of defensiveness and weariness. "But that's not the way to handle it, Mom. You scared us to death." Tom pressed on. "I didn't mean to." Martha's voice cracked, and I wasn't sure if it was genuine remorse or another act. Tom sighed. "We're going to see what the officers at the station say. They mentioned there was a recording." Martha was silent again, and then, "Fine. Do what you need to do." The call ended, and Tom and I got ready to go to the station. We needed answers. At the station, Officer Daniels greeted us. "We have the footage from when she brought Jamie in. You should see this." We braced ourselves as the officer played the video. There was Martha, looking calm and collected as she handed Jamie over to the officer. Her voice was clear, devoid of distress. "I can't do this anymore. He's the grandson." My heart sank. There was no sign of the sick, distressed grandmother she had claimed to be. "We need a copy of this," Tom said, his voice hard. Back home, Martha was pacing the living room. When we walked in, she turned to us, a question in her eyes. "We saw the footage, Martha," I said, my voice cold. "You weren't sick. You weren't in distress. You lied." Martha's face fell, and then, unexpectedly, she sat down, her shoulders slumping. I couldn't handle it. I thought I could, but..." Tom interrupted her. "You put Jamie at risk. You lied to us, to the police. How could you?" Tears streamed down Martha's face, but the theatrics didn't move us this time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. But it was too late. The trust was broken. That evening, after Martha had packed her things and left, Tom, Jamie, and I sat in the living room, a tight little circle. We didn't say much, but we didn't need to. We had each other, and we would move forward, together. The truth had been painful, but it had also set us free. It had only been a few days since Martha had left when she unexpectedly reappeared at our doorstep. As if the incident had never occurred, she stood there with a smile, offering to watch Jamie. "Martha, what are you doing here?" I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I've come to help with Jamie, like before. You obviously need the help," she said, brushing past me into the house. I was dumbfounded. "Martha, after what happened, you think we can just go back to how things were?" She turned to me with a defiant look. "Well, it wouldn't have happened if you had come when I called," she retorted, her words sharp like daggers. Before I could respond, Tom walked in, his face darkening at the sight of his mother. "What are you saying, Mom? That this was Sarah's fault?" Martha's eyes didn't waver. If she had been a stay-at-home mother like she should be, none of this would have happened. That's when Tom exploded, the anger and frustration that had been simmering for days finally boiling over. "How dare you? You do this out of spite for Sarah, and you put Jamie in danger because of it." Martha recoiled as if slapped, her facade crumbling. "Tom, No, Mom, I don't want to hear it. You've crossed a line. You deliberately ignored Sarah. You neglected your grandson, and for what? To prove a point?" His voice was a crescendo of outrage. She tried to interrupt, to defend herself, but Tom wouldn't have it. "I can't trust you anymore, Mom. I don't want you here. I don't want to talk to you until you realize the gravity of what you've done." Martha looked between us, the realization dawning that she had indeed gone too far. Without another word, she turned and left, the finality of the moment hanging heavy in the air. Tom turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and resolve. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I should have seen it sooner. But I promise you, Jamie's safety comes first. We come first." I nodded, the solidarity between us more potent than ever. "I know, Tom. We'll get through this, just like we always do. Together." We knew the road ahead would be without Martha, at least for the foreseeable future. It was a painful but necessary decision, a line drawn to protect our son, our family, our peace.